Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most underappreciated and absolutely brutal professions of the medieval world, the battlefield armory. Now, I'm not talking about some romanticized blacksmith montage where a shirtless craftsman dramatically plunges glowing steel into water while epic music plays. No, I'm talking about the grimy, bloody, economically devastating reality of keeping an entire military force's protective gear functional during an era when a single rusted rivet could mean the difference between a knight riding home to his castle or bleeding out in a muddy field because his shoulder plate fell off mid-combat. Picture this. You're standing in a cramped stone workshop that smells like metal shavings, old sweat, coal smoke, and something you really hope is just rust but suspect might be dried blood. It's barely past dawn, the kind of gray medieval morning where the sun seems personally offended by the idea of providing warmth. Outside, you can hear the camp stirring horses snorting, men shouting orders, the distant clang of practice weapons. And you're staring at a workbench absolutely buried under damaged equipment. There's a breastplate with a crossbow bolt wedged in it at an angle that makes your stomach turn just thinking about the impact. A helmet with a dent so deep it looks like someone used it as a church bell. Gauntlets with missing fingers, both the metal kind and, horrifyingly, you're pretty sure there's still a piece of an actual human finger stuck in one of them. You probably think you could handle this, right? You've watched enough movies, played enough video games. How hard could medieval armor maintenance really be? Well, spoiler alert, you wouldn't last until lunch. And I'm going to walk you through exactly why, in excruciating detail, because that's what we do here: turn history into the most relaxing nightmare you've ever experienced. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you in Melbourne where it's already tomorrow? Seattle where the rain matches this medieval mood perfectly? I love seeing this little community spread across time zones, all of us diving into history while the rest of the world sleeps. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first moment of panic comes when the master armor-era man, whose fingers are so scarred they look like old tree bark, shoves a leather apron at you and gestures vaguely at the apocalyptic pile of equipment. "Sort it," he grunts, already turning back to his own work at the main forge. "Sort it, right? Sort the twisted metal formerly known as protective equipment into what exactly? Categories of damage? Levels of hopelessness? Pieces that might be armor versus pieces that might be modern art? You pick up the first item, a chainmail coif that weighs approximately 8,000 pounds, or at least that's what your arms insist after holding it for 30 seconds. Chainmail, you realize with dawning horror, isn't a single piece of equipment. It's thousands of tiny iron rings, each one individually linked to 4 others in a pattern that somehow holds together. Except this one isn't holding together. At least 50 rings are broken, dangling like sad little metal tears, and there are rust spots spreading across the surface like some kind of ferrous disease. The master armorer glances over. "Needs full inspection," he says, somehow making 2 words sound like a death sentence. "Check every ring. Mark the broken ones. Tally them for the replacement order." Every ring. You start counting. There are literally thousands of them in just this one coif. A typical male coif used somewhere between 8 to 15,000 individual rings, depending on the size and the pattern. The rings are tiny, maybe 8 millimeters in diameter if you're lucky. Your eyes start to hurt after about 200. You lose count. You start over. You lose count again. This is what madness feels like. You think, and you've been here for maybe 20 minutes. Here's a fun fact that makes this even worse. Making chainmail wasn't just tedious, it was an art form that took years to master. Each ring had to be individually riveted closed after being linked with its neighbors. That means someone sat there probably in this very workshop and closed thousands of tiny rings, one at a time, riveting each one with a tiny hammer and a precision you can barely imagine. And now you're expected to identify which ones are damaged, remove them without destroying the surrounding rings, and keep track of how many replacement rings you'll need to order from the wire drawer. Oh, you didn't know wire drawers were a separate profession? Welcome to medieval specialization, where every single component of armor production was its own entire career path. But here's the thing that really drives home how unprepared you are. You don't actually know what you're looking at half the time. That piece of curved metal with the articulated plates, is that part of a pauldron, shoulder armor, or a sabaton, foot armor? The straps attached to this breastplate, are they broken, or are they supposed to look like that? Medieval armor wasn't standardized. There was no catalog you could flip through, no instruction manual, no YouTube tutorial titled How to Identify 15th Century Milanese Armor Components for Beginners. Every piece was custom-made for a specific person, often by different armorers with different regional styles and techniques. A German Gothic suit looked completely different from Italian white armor. English styles diverged from French preferences. And unless you had years of experience, you couldn't tell a German Gothic gauntlet from an Italian articulated vambrace if your life depended on it. And trust me, in this job, your life kind of does depend on it. Because when a knight rides into battle wearing armor you maintained, and that armor fails, he doesn't just die. He dies screaming your name as the reason his family won't have a father anymore. The medieval world didn't have liability waivers. They had revenge. They had reputations that could be destroyed overnight. They had guild systems that would blacklist you so thoroughly you'd end up begging in the streets if you made too many catastrophic mistakes. Around you, the workshop is already in full chaos, and it's not even fully light outside yet. The master armorer has 3 apprentices working the forge, heating metal for repairs. The sound is absolutely relentless hammers on anvils, creating a rhythm that sounds almost musical until you realize it's going to continue for the next 16 hours straight. Each strike sends vibrations through the stone floor. The noise echoes off the walls, compounds on itself, becomes this living thing that crawls inside your skull and sets up residence. There's a boy, probably 12 years old, working the bellows. His face is already red from exertion and heat, sweat dripping down his soot-stained cheeks. He'll do this for hours, days, years, if he survives to become a full apprentice. The bellows work is crucial. You need consistent, hot temperatures for metal work, and that means someone has to pump those bellows in a steady rhythm, maintaining the airflow to the coals, keeping everything at precisely the right temperature. Too cold, and the metal won't shape properly. Too hot, and you can ruin the temper of the steel, making it brittle and useless. Historians still argue whether the apprenticeship system was more exploitative or educational, whether these young boys were learning valuable trades or being worked nearly to death for the economic benefit of their masters. What's not really up for debate is that they worked brutal hours starting from childhood, often living in the workshop itself, breathing coal smoke and metal dust for years before they'd ever be allowed to touch the actual armor-making process. In the corner, an older journeyman is using a tool you don't recognize to do something you can't identify to a piece of equipment you can't name. He's got this look of intense concentration, the kind that suggests one wrong move could ruin hours of work. Welcome to medieval trades, where everything is a mystery and the learning curve is basically a vertical wall that's also on fire. You try to focus on your sorting task, creating mental categories, helmets in one area, body armor in another, limb protection over there. But then you realize some pieces are combination items. Where does a beaver go? It protects the neck and chin. So is it a helmet component or body armor? And what about these weird articulated pieces that seem to connect a breastplate to a backplate? Are those separate items or part of a complete harness? The terminology alone would break your brain. Gorget, pauldron, rear brace, cooter, vambrace, gauntlet, and that's just one arm. The legs have their own equally confusing vocabulary. Cuisse, polion, greave, sabaton. And God help you if you mix up a fald with a tacet, because apparently those are different things even though they both protect the same general hip area and look nearly identical to your untrained eye. Then a knight actually shows up. Not in full armor, that would be absurd for just walking around camp, but in enough gear that you can tell he's important. He's got that specific kind of walk that wealthy men develop when they've never been told no in their entire lives. His boots are fine leather. His surcoat has embroidery that probably cost more than your family's annual income. He's the kind of man who has people specifically employed to help him get dressed in the morning. My gorget. He announces, not asks, just announces. The hinge is sticking. The master armorer nods, and suddenly you're holding this knight's gorget collar piece that protects the throat, trying to figure out where exactly the hinge mechanism even is. It's not obvious. Nothing about medieval armor is obvious. The piece is beautifully made. You can tell that much. The steel has been polished to a mirror shine. There's decorative etching along the edges. Some kind of floral pattern that must have taken hours to engrave. But where's the hinge? You turn it over. You turn it again. There are several articulation points where different segments connect. Any one of them could be the hinge. The knight is staring at you. The master armorer is staring at you. You can feel the weight of their judgment like a physical thing pressing down on your shoulders. The left articulation. The knight says slowly, like he's talking to a particularly dim horse. Left from whose perspective? Yours or his? When the armor is being worn, or when it's sitting on a table. You find something that might be an articulation. You find something that might be a hinge. There's a small pin holding two pieces together, and it does seem a bit stiff when you try to move it. You have no idea if this is the left one because you've lost all sense of spatial orientation while holding this thing, rotating it in your hands like you're trying to solve a metal puzzle box. The knight sighs the sigh of a man who knows he's going to die because the armorer is an idiot. And honestly, he might be right. The master armorer mercifully rescues you, taking the gorget and identifying the problem in about 3 seconds. It needs cleaning and oil. Simple, right? Except the oil is special oil, probably a mixture of animal fat and beeswax, carefully formulated to not cause corrosion. The cleaning requires partial disassembly. The disassembly requires tools you don't know how to use, tiny punches to drive out pins without damaging the surrounding metal, files to smooth any rough spots, burnishing tools to restore the polish. And if you scratch the decorative engraving on the front, the engraving that probably cost more than you'll earn in 5 years, the knight will have you whipped. Or fired. Or both. Medieval craftsmen lived and died by their reputations. One wealthy client complaining loudly about your incompetence could end your career before it even started. This is your new reality. You're in a medieval battlefield armory, surrounded by hundreds of pounds of damaged military equipment, responsible for maintaining the only thing standing between trained warriors and gruesome death, and you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. The master armorer returns to his forge. The knight walks away, muttering something about the quality of help these days, and you just know that comment is going to make it back to his lord, who will mention it to the army commander, who will remember your face when he's deciding who to keep employed and who to send packing. The pile of broken equipment hasn't gotten any smaller. In fact, it might have gotten bigger. Did someone just drop off another basket of damaged pieces while you weren't looking? Your back already hurts from standing on the stone floor. Medieval workshops didn't have rubber mats or ergonomic considerations. You stood on stone or packed earth for your entire shift, and if your feet and back didn't hurt by the end of the day, you probably weren't working hard enough. Your hands are filthy, stained with rust and oil and soot. Your fingernails are already broken. You've been here less than an hour. Outside, you can hear the army coming to life. Sergeants are bellowing orders. Horses are being led to the farrier. Somewhere, men are training with practice weapons, the wooden clack of sword on shield drifting through the morning air. The whole camp operates on a schedule of organized chaos, and the armory sits at the center of it all, the beating heart that keeps the military body functioning. Because here's what nobody tells you about medieval warfare. The actual fighting was probably only 10% of a soldier's experience. The other 90% was maintenance, logistics, waiting, preparing, and dealing with equipment that was constantly trying to fall apart. Every strap wore out. Every joint needed oiling. Every metal surface wanted to rust. Entropy was a full-time enemy, and you were now on the front lines of that particular war. The master armorer catches you standing there, staring at the pile with what must be obvious despair on your face. He almost smiles. Almost. First day is always the worst, he says, which might be the kindest thing you've heard all morning. Then he adds, tomorrow will be worse, though. The army moves in 3 days, and everything needs to be battle-ready. 3 days. You look at the pile again. You look at your hands, already aching from holding heavy chainmail. You look at the forge, where the temperature must be approaching the surface of the sun. You look at the boy on the bellows, who's been pumping steadily this entire time without complaint, and you realize this is just normal life for him. This is every day. Welcome to the armory. Try not to die of exhaustion before nightfall. And definitely don't drop that night's gorget, because we both know you can't afford to replace it. The sorting eventually gets finished mostly because the master armorer takes pity on you and assigns an actual apprentice to help, and now you're facing what will become your nemesis for the foreseeable future. Rust. Not the romantic, aged patina you see on antique swords in museums. No, this is aggressive, spreading, metal-eating corrosion that wants nothing more than to reduce every piece of expensive military equipment into reddish-brown powder. You're handed a bucket. Inside the bucket is sand mixed with vinegar, creating this gritty, acidic paste that smells like it could strip paint off a wall. Next to the bucket is a pile of rags that might have been white once, in a previous life, before they were subjected to years of metal polishing. And in front of you is a breastplate that looks like it was fished out of a swamp, covered in rust spots ranging from tiny freckles to patches the size of your palm. Scrub. The master armorer instructs, demonstrating the technique with broad, circular motions. Get into the fluting, under the rivets, everywhere. Miss a spot, and the rust spreads. He makes it look easy. He's been doing this for probably 30 years. His arms are like iron themselves, muscles built from a lifetime of this exact repetitive motion. You dip your rag into the vinegar sand mixture and start scrubbing. Within 5 minutes, your arms are burning. Within 10, you're questioning every life choice that brought you to this moment. The sand is abrasive enough to remove rust, which means it's also abrasive enough to absolutely shred your hands. The vinegar finds every tiny cut, every hangnail, every microscopic crack in your skin and turns it into a stinging announcement of its presence. But here's the truly soul-crushing part. You're barely making progress. The rust doesn't just wipe away like dirt. You have to scrub each section repeatedly, grinding the mixture into the metal, watching as tiny particles of iron oxide slowly, painfully slowly, transfer from the breastplate to your rag. The rag turns orange. Your hands turn orange. Everything turns orange. You're pretty sure you're going to be finding orange residue in places you didn't know existed for the next week. And this is just one breastplate. Behind you, there are 17 more pieces of body armor waiting, plus helmets, plus limb armor, plus all that chainmail you sorted earlier, which is going to be a special kind of nightmare because you'll need to scrub between individual rings, all 8 to 15,000 of them, making sure no rust is hiding in the tiny gaps where the rings overlap. Medieval armourers had a saying, though historians debate whether it was widespread or just specific to certain guilds. Rust never sleeps, so neither do we. It's darkly poetic and probably absolutely true. Rust is a chemical process, iron oxidizing when exposed to moisture and air. In a medieval military camp, you've got both in abundance. Morning dew, rain, the humidity from hundreds of men and horses breathing and sweating in close quarters. Rivers and streams that armies camp beside. Every single environmental factor is conspiring to corrode the equipment. And it's not like you can just prevent rust with modern solutions. You don't have stainless steel that won't be invented for another several centuries. You don't have powder coating or galvanization or any of the protective treatments we take for granted. You have oil. You have wax. You have careful storage and constant, endless vigilance. The moment you stop actively fighting rust, it wins. There's a journeyman working next to you on a helmet, and you notice his hands. They're not just calisetheri scarred, stained permanently orange-brown, with fingernails that look like they've been through a war of their own. The skin around his knuckles is cracked and rough. These are hands that have been doing this exact job for years, and they show every hour of it. First week is the worst, he says, noticing your attention. Skin toughens up eventually. Mostly. That's reassuring. You go back to scrubbing, trying to find a rhythm that doesn't immediately exhaust you. Scrub, 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 dip the rag, wring it out, scrub some more. The motion becomes meditative in the worst way. You're aware of every repetition, every moment, time stretching out like taffy. Here's something that makes this even more frustrating. You can't scrub too hard. Yes, you need to remove the rust, but the metal underneath is expensive and carefully crafted. Scrub too aggressively, and you'll scratch the surface, creating tiny grooves where water can collect and guess what causes more rust. You need to be firm but controlled, maintaining just the right pressure, which requires a delicate touch you definitely don't have and probably won't develop for months. The master armorer walks by, inspects your work, and points to a section you thought was clean. Still rust in the fluting, he says. See there, in the groove? You look closer. He's right. There's a thin line of rust hiding in one of the decorative ridges that run across the breastplate. You'd missed it completely. You dip your rag again and work the mixture into the groove, trying to get the fabric to conform to the curved surface. Your fingers are already pruning from the vinegar. You're developing a headache from the fumes. This is your life now. After what feels like 3 hours but is probably only 45 minutes, you finish the breastplate. It gleams. Well, most of it gleams. There are still some suspicious spots that might be staining rather than rust, but you're not confident enough to make that distinction. You hold it up for inspection. The master armorer examines it with the critical eye of a man who spent his entire life looking at metal. He finds 2 spots you missed. Of course he does. You scrub them. Finally, he grunts approval and points to the next piece in the pile. It's a helmet. A great helm. Specifically, the kind that completely encloses the head with just a narrow eye slit and some breathing holes. And it's rusted on the inside. Of course it is. Because the inside of a helmet is where sweat accumulates, where moisture gets trapped, where rust loves to throw parties and invite all its friends. Getting your hand inside the helmet to scrub the interior surfaces is like trying to perform surgery through a keyhole. You can't see what you're doing. You can barely fit your hand through the neck opening. The breathing holes are too small to provide any useful access. You end up working by feel, scrubbing blindly, hoping you're actually hitting the rusted areas and not just redistributing the problem. The journeyman next to you laughs. Wait until you have to clean inside a bassinet with an aventail, he says. That's when you really understand suffering. You don't know what those words mean, but they sound ominous. You focus on your great helm, your shoulder wedged against the workbench at an awkward angle, your hand cramping inside the narrow space, vinegar dripping down your wrist into your sleeve. This is glamorous. This is living the dream. This is what you imagined when you thought about medieval craftsmanship. Here's a fun fact that makes this whole situation even more absurd. Some types of armor were designed with rust prevention in mind. Milanese armourers in the 15th century would sometimes apply a blued or blackened finish to their steel, a heat treatment that created a thin layer of magnetite on the surface that was more resistant to corrosion. But that process was expensive, time-consuming, and not every piece of armor received such treatment. Most of what you're looking at is plain steel, naked and vulnerable to the elements. And speaking of elements, it starts raining. Of course it does. This is medieval Europe, where rain is practically a geographical feature. You hear it pattering on the roof, which would be soothing if it didn't mean that every piece of armor currently in storage outside is now getting wet, creating future work for you. The army's equipment doesn't all fit inside the workshop. Most of it is kept in supply wagons with canvas covers that are, charitably speaking, not waterproof. The master armorer sighs the sigh of a man who's lived through this scenario 1,000 times. We'll need to oil everything in storage after this, he announces to the workshop. Full inventory. The apprentices groan. You don't fully understand why yet, but you will. Oiling the inventory means taking out every single piece of stored equipment, wiping it down, applying fresh oil, and putting it back. For an army of any size, that's hundreds of items. That's hours of work. That's your entire afternoon, which you'd naively hoped might involve learning some actual armor-making skills, gone to preventive maintenance. But that's later. Right now, you're still scrubbing rust. your hands slowly transforming into something that resembles raw meat wrapped in orange-stained leather. You finish the great helmosly and move on to a pair of gauntlets. These are articulated, with multiple small plates connected by rivets, and rust has crept into every single joint. You have to disassemble them, partially, at least, enough to clean between the plates. This requires driving out tiny rivets without damaging them, because you'll need to reuse them. The pins are corroded, stuck in place, requiring careful tapping with a small hammer and punch. Too hard, and you'll deform the rivet. Too soft, and nothing happens. You're looking for a Goldilocks zone of force that you can only find through experience you don't have. One rivet slips out. Victory. The second one breaks. The master armorer appears at your shoulder like a disappointed ghost. "We'll need a replacement," he says. "Add it to the list." There's a list. Of course there's a list. A running tally of every component that needs to be fabricated or purchased to repair the damaged equipment. Rivets, rings for chainmail, leather straps, buckles, padding material. The list is already 3 pages long and growing. Someone has to track all this. Someone has to source the materials. Someone has to manage the budget, negotiate with suppliers, ensure everything arrives in time. That someone is the master armorer, and you're beginning to understand why he looks like he aged about 40 years in the last 5. You clean between the gauntlet plates, marveling at how much rust can accumulate in such small spaces. Medieval armorers understood articulation. They knew how to create joints that allowed movement while maintaining protection. But every joint is a trap for moisture, dirt, and corrosion. The more sophisticated the armor, the more maintenance it requires. It's an engineering trade-off that nobody talks about in the history books. Historians still argue whether the increasing complexity of late medieval armor was driven by actual battlefield needs or by aristocratic one-upmanship. Knights demanding ever more elaborate protection to display their wealth and status. What's clear is that someone had to maintain all that complexity, and that someone was having a terrible time. By midday, you've cleaned maybe a quarter of the pile. Your hands are destroyed. The vinegar has turned every minor skin imperfection into a major annoyance. Your back hurts from bending over the workbench. Your shoulders ache from the repetitive scrubbing motion. You're thirsty, but the water bucket is all the way across the workshop, and standing up feels like more effort than it's worth. The boy on the bellows gets relieved by another apprentice. He walks past you to the water bucket, and you notice he's limping slightly. Working the bellows isn't just tyrangites physically damaging over time. Repetitive motion injuries weren't invented in the modern era. We just have fancy names for them now. Medieval craftsmen dealt with joint problems, back issues, chronic pain from years of performing the same tasks over and over. They just didn't have workers' compensation or ergonomic consultants. Lunch is bread, cheese, and weak beer, eaten at your workbench because there's no time for proper breaks. The bread is dense and slightly stale. The cheese is fine, probably. The beer is safer than the water and marginally more interesting than both. You eat mechanically, barely tasting anything, already thinking about the afternoon's work, because the rust never stops. Even as you clean these pieces, oxidation is starting somewhere else, on equipment in storage, on the pieces you cleaned yesterday, on brand new armor that hasn't even been issued yet, because the air itself is the enemy. You're not fighting a battle you can win. You're fighting a battle you can only postpone, day after day, piece by piece, until eventually your hands are as scarred and stained as the journeyman working next to you. The rain continues. Somewhere outside, soldiers are probably cursing as they try to keep their gear dry, knowing that failure means extra work for you, which means extra work for them when you're too backed up to return their equipment on time. The whole military ecosystem is connected, every component depending on every other component, and rust is the universal solvent threatening to dissolve the entire structure. You pick up your rag. You dip it in the vinegar sand mixture. You start scrubbing the next piece in the pile. The afternoon stretches ahead of you like an endless corridor. Each piece of rusted equipment, another door you have to open, another problem you have to solve, another small battle in an unwinnable war against time, moisture, and chemistry. Welcome to day one of fighting rust. You've got approximately 5,000 more days of this ahead of you if you survive the apprenticeship. Try not to think about it too hard, or the existential dread might set in before the hand cramps do. The afternoon brings a new circle of hell. The forge. You've been scrubbing rust for hours, and just when you thought maybe, possibly, you'd be allowed to continue with that monotonous but relatively safe task, the master armorer beckons you over to where the real work happens. The heat hits you before you even get close, a wall of warmth that quickly becomes oppressive as you approach the brick structure that's been radiating thermal energy all morning. The forge is the heart of the armory, literally and figuratively. It's where raw materials become equipment, where damaged pieces get reshaped, where the actual craft of armor making happens. It's also approximately the temperature of the sun's surface, or at least that's what your body insists as you step closer. The master armorer is heating a piece of steel in the coals, the metal gradually shifting from dull gray to cherry red to orange to that almost white glow that means it's ready to work. He pulls it out with long tongs and places it on the anvil. "Watch," he says, then proceeds to strike the metal with a hammer in a pattern that looks simple but produces a complex, controlled deformation of the steel. 5 strikes. The metal bends slightly. He rotates it, strikes again. A different angle, different force. The piece is transforming under his hammer, becoming more curved, taking on the shape needed for whatever repair he's working on. He makes it look effortless, like the metal wants to become the shape he's envisioning, like physics is just a suggestion he's politely following. "Your turn," he says, and hands you the hammer. The hammer is heavy, not comically heavy, not Thor's hammer heavy, but definitely, "I'm going to feel this in my shoulder tomorrow" heavy. It's a cross-peen hammer, with one flat face and one wedge-shaped face, designed specifically for metalwork. The handle is smooth from years of use, fitted perfectly to the master armorer's grip, which means it feels slightly wrong in yours. He puts a different piece of steel in the forge, heating it to working temperature. This one is a damaged Vamber's forearm protection that got bent when something very heavy hit it very hard. Your job is to hammer it back into shape. Simple, right? The metal comes out of the forge glowing orange. The master armorer places it on the anvil. "Strike where I point," he instructs. Firm, controlled hits. Don't flail. You raise the hammer. You bring it down. The impact jars your entire arm, the shock traveling up through your wrist, elbow, shoulder, reverberating in your teeth. The metal barely moves. You've accomplished approximately nothing except making a loud noise and possibly dislocating your shoulder. "Harder," the master armorer says, "and hit the metal, not the anvil around it." You try again. This time you actually hit the right spot, and the metal deforms slightly, but it's not the clean, controlled deformation you watched him create. It's more like you've added a new dent next to the old dent. You're not fixing anything, you're just redistributing the damage. Angle's wrong, he observes. You're hitting straight down. The force needs to go through the metal in the direction you want it to move. Think about the shape you're trying to create. You try to think about the shape. The metal is cooling, losing its orange glow, becoming darker. Your window of opportunity is closing. You strike again, trying to adjust the angle, and this time the metal does something closer to what you intended. Maybe. It's hard to tell. Everything is happening so fast, and your brain is trying to process the heat, the weight of the hammer, the angle of impact, the precise spot to hit, all while the metal is actively cooling and becoming harder to work. Back in the forge, the master armorer says, taking the piece from the anvil, the metal has cooled to the point where further hammering would be counterproductive. You'd just be cold working the steel, making it brittle rather than shaping it properly. Here's something they don't tell you about blacksmithing. Timing is everything. Steel has a temperature window where it's malleable enough to shape but still solid enough to hold its form. Too hot, and you risk burning the metal, ruining its structural integrity. Too cold, and you're just beating on iron that doesn't want to move. That window is maybe a minute, maybe less, depending on the size of the piece and the forge temperature. You have 60 seconds or less to accomplish whatever shaping you need to do, and every second you waste trying to figure out where to hit or how hard to swing is a second lost. The master armorer is patient, which you're beginning to realize is a heroic quality in a teacher. He reheats the vambrace, places it back on the anvil, guides you through another series of strikes. You're getting slightly better, or at least you're getting better at predicting how the hammer will feel in your hands. The metal is slowly, painfully slowly, returning to something approximating its original curve. But here's the reality. You're doing in 10 heating cycles what the master armorer could accomplish in 2. You're burning expensive coal that has to be purchased and transported, and using up time that could be spent on actual productive work. Every minute you spend learning is a minute not spent fulfilling the workshop's obligations. The economics of training are brutal. Around you, the workshop continues its chaotic symphony. The apprentices are working on their own projects, producing the constant percussion of hammer on anvil. The journeyman has moved from rust removal to leather work, cutting and preparing the straps that hold armor components together. Another apprentice is filing down rough edges on a newly forged piece, the metallic scraping adding a counterpoint to the hammering. The heat is unbelievable. You're sweating through your tunic, and you're not even the one working the bellows. The boy currently pumping air into the forge has sweat literally dripping off his nose, his face flushed red, his breathing heavy but steady. He maintains the rhythm without faltering, because if the temperature drops, all the metal currently being worked will cool too quickly, and multiple projects will be ruined simultaneously. Medieval forges didn't have temperature gauges. Armorers learned to read the color of heated steel, developing an intuitive understanding of temperature based purely on visual cues. Cherry red meant one temperature range, orange another, yellow-white another. Get it wrong, and you could ruin expensive materials or create weak points in critical protective equipment. This was knowledge gained through years of experience, often years of mistakes, and occasionally those mistakes were fatal when the improperly forged armor failed in battle. After perhaps the 15th attempt, The vambrace looks approximately correct. The master armorer examines it with his critical eye, running his fingers along the inner curve, checking for irregularities. Acceptable, he says, which your learning is high praise from a man who treats perfection as the minimum standard. Now the other side. The other side. Of course, there's another side. The vambrace that got bent has a matching piece for the other arm, and it's also damaged. You get to do this entire process again, trying to replicate the curve you just created, maintaining symmetry between the two pieces because asymmetric armor doesn't just look bad, it creates uncomfortable pressure points and can restrict movement. You heat the second vambrace. You hammer. You're developing blisters on your palm where the hammer handle rubs. The heat is making you lightheaded. You're pretty sure you've inhaled enough coal smoke to qualify as a mining accident. But the metal is slowly, grudgingly taking the shape you're trying to impose on it. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmanship was superior to modern manufacturing, whether hand-forged items possessed some ineffable quality that machine-made products lack. What's not up for debate is that hand-forging was incredibly labor-intensive, required years of skill development, and was absolutely exhausting for everyone involved. Every piece of equipment represented hours of human effort, human expertise, and human suffering in the form of burned hands, strained muscles, and lungs full of smoke. There's a crash from across the workshop. One of the apprentices has dropped something, a backplate. From the sound of it, the master armorer's head snaps around with predatory speed. The apprentice is already apologizing, checking the piece for damage. If it's dented, that's more repair work. If it's cracked, that's potentially a complete loss of expensive materials. The master armorer stalks over to inspect, and you can see the apprentice visibly shrinking under his gaze. The verdict: minor damage, easily fixed, but the apprentice gets a verbal lashing about proper handling techniques that makes you grateful it wasn't you who dropped it. Medieval workshops operated on a pedagogy of public humiliation and collective responsibility. Everyone learned from everyone else's mistakes because there was no privacy in the cramped workspace, and shame was considered an effective teaching tool. You finish the second vambrace. It's not perfect, but it's functional, which is apparently the goal for battlefield repairs. The master armorer moves you on to the next task: riveting. Because of course you broke that rivet earlier while cleaning the gauntlets, and now you need to make a replacement. Making a rivet sounds simple. It's just a small metal fastener, right? How hard could it be? Extremely hard. As it turns out, the rivet needs to be precisely the right diameter to fit the hole in the armor plates. It needs to be the right length, long enough to secure both plates with enough extra material to form the head, but not so long that it protrudes awkwardly. And it needs to be made from the right type of metal so it doesn't create a galvanic reaction with the surrounding armor that would accelerate corrosion. You start with a piece of iron wire. The master armorer shows you how to cut it to length using a hardwood chisel that fits into a square hole in the anvil. You heat the wire end in the forge until it glows, then place it in a rivet head-era metal block with a hemispherical depression. You strike the heated end with a hammer, spreading the metal to form the rivet head. Or at least, that's the theory. In practice, you hit it at a slight angle, and the rivet head forms asymmetrically. You try to correct it, but now you're cold working the metal, and it's not responding the way it should. The head is lumpy and off-center, a sad little mushroom of metal that looks nothing like the clean, professional rivets holding the rest of the armor together. Again, The master armorer says, handing you another piece of wire. You make another rivet. This one is slightly better, but the shaft is bent from your attempts to work the head. Unusable. Again. The third rivet is passable. Not good, but passable. The master armorer examines it, shrugs, and sets it aside. You'll make 100 more before you get good at it, he says, which is not encouraging but probably accurate. The afternoon wears on. You move between tasks, hammering, heating, shaping, learning the dozen small techniques that comprise the armorer's craft. How to hold the tongs so the heated metal doesn't slip. How to read the forge temperature by watching the coals. How to strike the anvil with the hammer between actual working strikes to maintain rhythm and prevent arm fatigue, a technique called ringing the anvil that serves no functional purpose except to help the blacksmith maintain timing. Your hands are accumulating damage at an impressive rate. Burns from brief contact with hot metal or the edge of the forge. Blisters from the hammer handle. Cuts from sharp edges on unfiled metal. The master armorer notices you examining a particularly painful burn on your thumb. That's why we wear leather gloves for some tasks, he says. But not all. You need to feel the metal sometimes, know how hot it is, how it's responding. The gloves come off for precision work. So you're supposed to choose between burning your hands or developing precision. This is the kind of lose-lose scenario that makes you understand why medieval craftsmen looked ancient by the time they hit 40. There's a particular smell to a working forge that you're becoming intimately familiar with. Hot metal has a scent, sort of metallic and sharp, like pennies but more intense. Coal smoke adds a thick, acrid note. The oil used for quenching creates brief clouds of vapor that smell vaguely organic and deeply unpleasant. Sweat yours and everyone else adds a human musk to the whole atmosphere. It's not a smell you'd bottle as perfume, but it's starting to become familiar, which is somehow worse than finding it repulsive. By the time the light outside starts to fade, you've accomplished maybe a quarter of what an experienced journeyman would do in the same time. You've made several rivets, repaired 2 pieces of armor to acceptable standards, and learned approximately 1% of what you'd need to know to function independently in this environment. Your clothes are soaked with sweat. Your hands look like they've been through a war. Your arms are shaking with fatigue. The master armorer banks the forge for the evening, spreading the coals to maintain some heat for tomorrow while preventing them from burning too hot overnight. The apprentices begin cleaning up, sweeping metal filings, organizing tools, preparing the workshop for another day identical to this one. Tomorrow, we start on the chainmail repairs. The master armorer announces, should be simpler than the forge work. The journeyman catches your eye and smiles grimly. You're starting to understand that when the master armorer says something will be simpler, he means different but equally terrible. You stumble out of the workshop into the evening air, which feels shockingly cool after hours in the forge's thermal embrace. Your hands are throbbing. Your shoulders are screaming. You smell like a coal mine that caught fire inside a blacksmith shop. And tomorrow, you get to do this all over again. Welcome to the forge. Try not to burn anything too important, including yourself. Morning arrives with the kind of inexorable certainty that makes you wish time was negotiable. Your hands are stiff. Your shoulders are sore. And there's a persistent ache in your lower back that suggests yesterday's work did more damage than you realized in the moment. But the master armorer doesn't care about your discomfort. The army doesn't care about your pain. And the pile of damaged equipment certainly doesn't care about anything except continuing to exist as a monument to your inadequacy. Today brings a new challenge. A nobleman arrives who needs his armor adjusted. Not repaired adjusted. This is somehow worse. He sweeps into the workshop trailing an assistant and an air of absolute confidence in his own importance. His clothes are fine wool, dyed in colors that cost more per yard than you'll earn in a month. He's got rings on multiple fingers, each one probably worth more than the entire forge setup. And he's looking at you and the master armorer like your servants who exist solely to fulfill his whims, which, to be fair, is basically accurate in the medieval social hierarchy. "I need my harness fitted," he announces. A harness, you're learning, is the complete suit of armor, the full ensemble of plates, straps, padding, and accessories that turn a vulnerable human into an armored fighting unit. The tournament is in 2 weeks, and the pauldrons are restricting my movement. The master armorer bows slightly, the minimum respect required by social convention. "Of course, my lord, if you would allow us to examine the pieces." The nobleman's assistant produces the armor components from a wooden case lined with fabric. Even in pieces, you can tell this is expensive equipment. The steel has been polished to a mirror finish. The edges are beveled and filed smooth. There's decorative etching along the borders of each plate scrollwork and flourishes that serve no protective purpose but announce to everyone watching that the wearer can afford to pay craftsmen for hours of purely aesthetic work. The pauldron shoulder armor are particularly elaborate. They're articulated with multiple lames, small overlapping plates that allow the shoulder to move while maintaining protection. Each lame is connected to the others with sliding rivets in slots, a sophisticated mechanism that permits a range of motion. These aren't battlefield wear. These are tournament pieces, designed to look impressive while jousting or fighting in controlled environments where appearance matters as much as function. The nobleman strips off his outer garments with his assistant's help. Naturally, because apparently buttons are beneath him, and stands there in his linen undertunic while the master armorer begins the fitting process. You're expected to help, which means you're about to get an education in exactly how complicated proper armor fitting can be. First comes the arming doublet, a padded garment covered in attachment points leather straps with metal aglets that will connect to corresponding holes in the armor pieces. The doublet itself is a work of craftsmanship, quilted in a diamond pattern with layers of linen and wool padding. It needs to fit snugly but not restrictively, providing cushioning against impact while allowing full range of motion. The master armorer fastens the doublet, checking that it sits correctly on the nobleman's shoulders, that the hem falls to the right length, that nothing bunches or pulls awkwardly. Then comes the first armor piece, the cuirass, the torso protection. This consists of a breastplate and a backplate, connected at the shoulders and sides with straps and buckles. Hold the backplate. The master armorer instructs you, positioning you behind the nobleman. You lift the backplate into position while the master armorer presents the breastplate from the front. The two pieces need to meet precisely, the edges aligning so the connecting straps can be threaded through their attachment points. Except they don't align. The nobleman has apparently gained or lost weight since the last fitting, and now there's a gap of maybe half an inch where the plates should meet smoothly. The master armorer notices immediately, his practiced eye catching the misalignment. "You've changed size, my lord," he observes diplomatically. The armor is wrong. The nobleman counters, because acknowledging physical changes is apparently not in his vocabulary. The master armorer doesn't argue. "We can adjust the straps," he says, and perhaps add spacing washers to the rivets to account for the difference. This means modification work. This means the nobleman will be standing here, increasingly impatient, while you and the master armorer make real-time adjustments to equipment that costs more than a farm. No pressure. The pauldrons come next, and this is where the real problem becomes apparent. The nobleman raises his arms, demonstrating the motion he wants to achieve a full overhead reach, the kind of movement you'd need for certain sword techniques or lance work. The pauldrons restrict him at about 45 degrees, the lower lames catching against the upper edge of the breastplate. It's binding here, he says, pointing to where the metal edges are making contact. I need full extension for the overhead cut in the second bout. The master armorer examines the interaction point, running his fingers along the edges where the pauldron and cuirass meet. The problem is that the pauldron needs to be large enough to protect the shoulder adequately, but that size inherently limits the range of motion when the arm rises above a certain angle. It's a fundamental engineering trade-off, protection versus mobility. We can reshape the upper edge of the breastplate, the master armorer suggests, create more clearance for the pauldron rotation. And we can adjust the pauldron's attachment point on the doublet, change the angle slightly. The nobleman nods like this is obviously the correct solution, like he knew it all along, like the master armorer is just confirming his own expert opinion. You're learning that wealthy clients have a remarkable ability to be simultaneously completely ignorant and completely confident. The master armorer sketches the modification on a piece of charcoal on the workbench, a rough diagram showing where material needs to be removed from the breastplate edge. It's maybe half an inch of steel that needs to be carefully filed away without damaging the decorative etching or compromising the structural integrity of the armor. This will take several hours. The master armorer says, "You're welcome to return this afternoon, my lord." "I'll wait," the nobleman declares, because apparently he has nothing better to do than watch craftsmen work. He settles onto a stool near the wall, and his assistant produces a cup and a flask of wine from somewhere, because waiting in a dirty workshop is more tolerable with alcohol. You help the master armorer remove the pauldrons and cuirass, carefully organizing the pieces so nothing gets mixed up or damaged. The nobleman watches, sipping his wine, occasionally making comments about the quality of craftsmanship or the state of the workshop or the weather or absolutely anything that crosses his mind. He's one of those people who fills silence with noise, apparently uncomfortable with the idea that people might work without his running commentary. The actual modification work falls to the master armorer. This is too delicate for your current skill level. He clamps the breastplate in a padded vise, positioning it so he has clear access to the edge that needs reshaping. Then he selects a file from the tool rack, a smooth-cut file that will remove metal gradually rather than aggressively. Filing steel is meditative in the way that all repetitive, precise tasks become meditative when you have no choice but to keep doing them. The master armorer works in long, even strokes, checking his progress every dozen passes, ensuring he's maintaining the correct angle and curve. The decorative etching comes dangerously close to the area being modified, and one wrong move could scratch or damage the pattern, which would require an engraver to repair, which would cost extra money and time that the tournament schedule doesn't accommodate. You're assigned the task of preparing the pauldron for its attachment point adjustment. This means removing the current rivets that hold the attachment straps, which means carefully drilling out the rivet heads without enlarging the holes or damaging the surrounding metal. You're given a hand drill, basically a bow drill with a metal bit, and warned that if you slip and scratch the polished surface, The nobleman will probably demand compensation that exceeds your annual earnings. The drill bit is tiny, designed to fit precisely over the rivet head. You position it carefully, checking and rechecking your alignment. Then you begin the drilling motion, moving the bow back and forth, spinning the bit into the metal. The rivet head is hardened iron, resistant to the drill. You're applying pressure, trying to maintain perfect vertical alignment, feeling the bit slowly bite into the metal. Sweat drips into your eye. You don't dare wipe it away because that means moving, and moving means potentially slipping. The nobleman is saying something about the weather at his estate, comparing it to the weather here, a fascinating meteorological observation that absolutely nobody asked for. You tune him out, focusing entirely on the drill, the angle, the pressure, the microscopic progress of the bit into the rivet. The rivet head finally separates. You've managed not to scratch anything. Small victories. 3 more rivets to go on this pauldron. Then the entire process repeated on the other one. Historians still argue whether the relationship between medieval craftsmen and their aristocratic clients was primarily adversarial or collaborative, whether the social hierarchy created resentment or mutual respect. What's becoming clear to you is that it was probably both, simultaneously, depending on the specific craftsman and client and how good the wine was that day. The master armorer finishes filing the breastplate edge, checking the clearance by holding the pauldron in position and simulating the range of motion. It is better but not perfect. More filing, more checking. The work proceeds in incremental improvements, each one barely perceptible but collectively adding up to functional modification. Meanwhile, you've moved on to marking the new attachment points on the arming doublet. The master armorer has indicated where the straps need to be repositioned about an inch forward and half an inch lower than their current placement. This changes the angle at which the pauldron hangs, which should provide additional clearance for the overhead motion. But this means sewing new attachment points while the nobleman waits, which means you need to thread a leather needle with waxed linen thread and make stitches through multiple layers of quilted fabric without it looking terrible. Your hands, already abused from days of forge work and rust removal, are not thrilled about the fine motor control required for precision sewing. The needle is thick and stiff, designed to penetrate the heavy fabric of the doublet. You push it through the first layer, feeling resistance. The thread needs to be pulled tight, but not so tight that it puckers the fabric. Your stitches need to be small and even, creating a secure attachment point that won't fail under the stress of supporting several pounds of steel shoulder armor. Your first few stitches are embarrassingly too large, unevenly spaced, wobbling across the fabric like a drunk man's path home. The master armorer glances over, sighs quietly, and comes to supervise. "Smaller," he says. "More tension. Keep the spacing consistent." You try again. Slightly better. The nobleman is now discussing his horse's breeding lineage, a topic of apparently endless fascination to him and precisely zero fascination to anyone else in the room. His assistant nods at appropriate intervals, performing the emotional labor of pretending to care. You focus on your stitching, trying to block out the monologue. Sewing, you're discovering, uses completely different muscles than hammering or scrubbing or any of the other tasks you've been doing. Your fingers start to ache in new and exciting ways. The thread keeps tangling. You accidentally poke yourself with the needle, adding another small injury to your growing collection. Medieval life is just accumulating minor wounds until they either heal or get infected, with very little middle ground. After what feels like hours but is probably 30 minutes, you've completed the new attachment points on one side of the doublet. They're not beautiful, but they're functional, which seems to be the workshop's unofficial motto. The master armorer approves them with a nod and gestures for you to start on the other side. The fitting process resumes once the modifications are complete. The nobleman stands, sets down his wine, and allows himself to be dressed in his armor again. The process is elaborate and specific. Each piece has to go on in the correct order. Doublet, then cuirass, then the arm harness starting with the upper cannons and working down to the gauntlets, then the leg armor, and finally the pauldrons and helm. You're helping with the process, learning the sequence, discovering that there's a logic to the order pieces that need to attach to the doublet have to go on before pieces that will cover those attachment points. It's like a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece has specific dependencies, and getting the order wrong means partially disassembling everything to correct the mistake. The pauldrons attach to their new mounting points, the straps threading through the holes you drilled out and new rivets ones you made yesterday, surprisingly holding everything together. The nobleman raises his arm, testing the range of motion. Better. Not perfect, but better. He can get maybe 60 degrees of elevation now before the binding occurs. The master armorer adjusts the angle slightly, loosening one strap and tightening another, fine-tuning the hang of the pauldron. Another test. 70 degrees. Again, the nobleman says, and the master armorer makes another micro-adjustment. This is the reality of custom fitting. Endless tiny modifications, each one tested, each one evaluated, until the client is satisfied or the craftsman's patience runs out, whichever comes first. Finally, after perhaps the 15th iteration, the nobleman achieves the full overhead extension he wants. The pauldron clears the breastplate edge, the articulated lames sliding smoothly over each other, the whole assembly moving as a unified system rather than fighting against itself. Acceptable, the nobleman declares, which is apparently the highest praise he's capable of giving. He allows himself to be undressed again with his assistant's help, and the armor is carefully packed back into its case. He leaves coins on the workbench, not handed to the master armorer directly because that would involve acknowledging him as an equal, just left there like payment for a merchant. The amount is probably correct but feels insulting in its presentation. The workshop returns to its normal chaos after the nobleman departs. The apprentices go back to their tasks. The forge is relit. The pile of equipment waiting for repair hasn't shrunk, if anything. It's grown, because the army keeps using their gear and gear keeps breaking. You're exhausted, and you've essentially accomplished one task, helping fit one nobleman's tournament armor. Meanwhile, there are 50 soldiers who need their basic equipment maintained, and their needs are just as urgent even if they can't pay as well or complain as loudly. The master armorer catches your expression. Tournament work pays better, he explains, helps cover the costs of the battlefield repairs that don't pay enough. Everything balances eventually. Eventually, you're starting to understand that eventually is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. The economics of running an armory are apparently based on robbing wealthy Peter to pay soldier Paul, and hoping the whole system doesn't collapse before the campaign ends. Your hands hurt. Your back hurts. You've learned that custom fitting is somehow more stressful than forge work because the client is watching and judging every moment. And you've still got half a day of work ahead of you because the armor doesn't repair itself and the rust certainly isn't taking any days off. Welcome to the fitting process. Try not to scratch anything expensive, because you definitely can't afford to replace it. You thought the metal components were the difficult part of armor maintenance. You were wrong. So very catastrophically wrong. Because behind every gleaming suit of plate steel, underneath every carefully articulated pauldron and perfectly fitted cuirass, there's an entire hidden world of fabric, leather, and padding that nobody talks about in the heroic stories. And that world smells absolutely terrible. The master armorer leads you to a different section of the workshop, away from the forge, where several gambeson jackets are piled on a table. Gambesons, the padded undergarments that go beneath armor to absorb impact and prevent the metal from rubbing directly against skin. They look innocent enough at first glance. Quilted fabric jackets, stuffed with wool or linen batting. How bad could they be? You pick up the first one and immediately understand. This gambeson has been worn in battle, soaked with sweat, possibly bled on, definitely not washed in any recent time frame, and left to ferment in its own biological stew. The smell hits you like a physical Forsythia combination of body odor, mildew, old blood, and something else you can't quite identify but desperately wish you could forget. These need inspection and repair, the master armorer says, apparently immune to the olfactory assault. Check the stitching. Replace any sections where the padding has compressed too much. Reinforce the stress points. You hold the gambeson at arm's length, trying to breathe through your mouth. The fabric is stiff with dried sweat and dirt. There are dark stains that might be blood or might be rust transfer from the armor or might be something you're happier not identifying. The stitching along the quilted channels is coming undone in several places, allowing the wool batting inside to shift and clump. A journeyman working nearby laughs at your expression. First time with the soft goods? He asks. Wait until you have to restuff one. That's when the real fun begins. Restuffing. You don't like the sound of that. You examine the gambeson more closely, trying to assess the damage while touching it as little as possible. The quilted channels that hold the padding in place are crucial. They prevent all the wool from sliding to the bottom of the garment, which would leave the upper body unprotected and create a lumpy, useless piece of equipment. Several channels have split seams. The wool inside has indeed migrated, creating thick clumps in some areas and bare spots in others. This gambeson needs to be partially disassembled, the wool redistributed or replaced, and the whole thing resewn. It's hours of work for a garment that will just get sweaty and disgusting again the next time someone wears it into battle. You start with the seam repair, threading a needle with sturdy linen thread. The fabric is thick, multiple layers quilted together, and pushing the needle through requires actual force. Your fingers, already sore from previous day's work, protest this new form of abuse. The needle slips, jabs into your thumb. You bleed on the gambeson, adding your contribution to its collection of biological stains. The stitching needs to be tight and regular. These seams are under considerable stress when the garment is worn, theory holding padding in place while someone moves, fights, potentially gets hit hard enough to compress the padding significantly. Weak stitching means seam failure, which means unprotected areas, which means injury or death. No pressure. After maybe 20 minutes, you've repaired about 6 inches of seam. There are approximately 4 feet of damaged stitching on this one gambeson alone, and there are 6 more gambesons in the pile waiting for attention. The math is not encouraging. Faster, the master armorer observes, passing by. We need these ready by tomorrow. The company moves out in 2 days. Faster, right? You try to speed up, but faster stitching means sloppier stitching, and you can feel the master armorer's judgmental gaze even when he's not looking directly at you. You settle into a rhythm that's slightly faster than your initial pace, but still far slower than anyone competent would work. The journeyman who laughed earlier comes over with a different gambeson, one that's in worse shape than yours. "Watch this," he says, and proceeds to demonstrate the restuffing process you were dreading. He opens up a seam along one of the quilted channels, revealing the wool batting inside. Or rather, revealing what used to be wool batting and is now a compressed, felted mass that looks like something you'd find in a drain. He pulls it out, and you can see the wool has been compacted by repeated impacts, soaked with sweat, and probably never properly dried. It's basically ruined. This all needs replacing, he explains, pulling out handful after handful of disgusting wool. Then we stuff fresh wool in, distribute it evenly, and sew it closed. Try to get the density consistent across all the channels, or the protection will be uneven. He makes it look straightforward. You know it won't be. He moves to a basket filled with cleaned wool fluffy white stuff that looks shockingly pristine compared to what he just removed, and begins the restuffing process. He takes measured handfuls, pushing them into the channel, using a wooden dowel to distribute the wool evenly from the neck opening down to the hem. Not too tight or it restricts movement, he says. Not too loose or it doesn't absorb impact. You develop a feel for it eventually. Eventually, that word again. Everything in this profession apparently requires years of experience before you stop being completely incompetent. You watch him work, trying to memorize the technique, knowing that you'll be expected to do this yourself soon. Leather work comes next, and if you thought the gambesons were bad, leather maintenance is its own special hell. Armor uses leather everywhere: straps, hinges, attachment points, padding, reinforcement, and leather, unlike steel, is organic. It stretches, it shrinks, it rots, it gets eaten by insects, cracks when it dries out, and it goes slimy when it stays wet too long. The master armorer presents you with a collection of leather straps that have been removed from various pieces of armor. Some are stretched beyond usefulness. Some have cracked and split. Some have developed a disturbing fuzzy mold that suggests they've been stored improperly. All of them need to be replaced, making leather straps sound simple until you try to do it. First, you need to select leather of the appropriate thickness and quality. Too thin, and it'll snap under stress. Too thick, and it won't be flexible enough for its purpose. The workshop has several different leather types, some from cattle, some from pigs, some from goats, each with different properties. This one needs to be strong but flexible, the master armorer says, holding up a strap that attached a pauldron to a breastplate. Needs to handle the weight of the shoulder armor while allowing full range of motion. Use the medium-weight cowhide. You find the appropriate leather stocka section of tanned hide that's been treated but not yet cut to specific sizes. Cutting leather is an art form. You need to cut along the grain to maximize strength. Avoid weak spots or imperfections in the hide, and minimize waste because leather is expensive. The master armorer marks where you should cut, drawing a line with a stylus. You're given a leather knife, sharp enough to slice cleanly through the hide but requiring controlled pressure and a steady hand. You start cutting, following the line, trying to maintain consistent pressure. The knife wants to drift. The leather is tougher than you expected. Your cut wavers, becoming slightly jagged instead of smooth. The master armorer sighs, takes the knife, and demonstrates the correct technique confident, fluid strokes, letting the sharp blade do the work rather than forcing it. You try again on a different section. Better, but still not great. The strap you've cut is usable but not beautiful. It'll function, which is apparently all that matters for battlefield gear. But cutting is only the first step. The strap needs holes for rivets or stitching. These holes need to be precisely positioned and uniformly sized. You're given a puncha metal tool with a sharp, hollow end that cuts circular holes in leather when you strike it with a hammer. Positioning the punch requires measurement and marking. The master armorer shows you how to use a pair of dividers to mark equal distances along the strap, ensuring the holes are evenly spaced. Then you place the punch on each mark and strike it once with a hammer, driving the cutting edge through the leather. Except you don't strike hard enough, and the punch only partially cuts through. You strike again, but now the punch has shifted slightly, and the hole becomes elongated. Useless. You've ruined the strap. Start over. The second attempt is better. The holes are reasonably round and reasonably evenly spaced. The master armorer inspects them, finds them acceptable with clear reluctance, and moves you on to the next task, conditioning the leather. Leather needs to be treated with oils or fats to keep it supple. Left untreated, it dries out, becomes brittle, and cracks. But too much oil makes it soggy and weak. You need to apply just enough to maintain flexibility without compromising strength. You're given a mixture, probably tallow or some kind of rendered animal fat, possibly mixed with beeswax, and instructed to work it into several dried-out straps that are on the verge of cracking. You rub the mixture into the leather, working it in with your fingers, feeling the stiff material gradually soften. Your hands are now covered in animal fat. This is your life. You smell like old wool, dead animal products, and failure. Historians still argue whether leatherworking was considered a distinct craft from armorsmithing, or whether armorers were expected to master both metalwork and leathercraft as part of their trade. What's clear is that maintaining armor required both skill sets, and medieval craftsmen couldn't specialize the way modern workers can. The afternoon brings a new horror. Someone delivers a complete harness that's been stored improperly, and now has mildew growing on all the leather components and the quilted padding attached to the interior of the metal plates. The smell is indescribable, a musty, organic rot that suggests the entire assembly is slowly returning to nature. Clean it, the master armorer says, which is his solution to everything. Cleaning mildewed leather and fabric is a losing battle. You can remove the visible mold, but the spores have penetrated deep into the material. The leather will probably smell like mildew forever. The fabric padding might need complete replacement. But you try anyway, using a stiff brush and a mixture of vinegar and water, scrubbing away the fuzzy growth. The mold comes off, leaving behind stains and a persistent odor. The leather underneath is damaged. The mildew has eaten into the surface, creating weak spots. Some sections will definitely need replacement. You add to the list of required materials, watching it grow longer and more expensive. A buckle breaks while you're working on another piece. Just snaps under normal handling. The bronze casting fatigued from years of stress. Buckles are usually cast by specialized craftsmen, but the master armorer keeps a few spare blanks that can be shaped and fitted. You spend an hour filing a replacement buckle to the right size, creating the curved prong that will catch in the strap holes, testing it repeatedly until it opens and closes smoothly. Your fingers are bleeding again. Bronze filing creates sharp edges. and you've scraped your knuckles multiple times. The blood mixes with the animal fat on your hands, creating a grotesque paste. You're becoming a walking advertisement for workplace safety regulations that won't be invented for several centuries. The pile of leather work never seems to shrink. For every strap you repair, two more need attention. For every buckle you fix, another one breaks. Leather is a consumable component in the armor system, constantly wearing out, constantly needing replacement. And you're starting to realize that managing this logistics chain, keeping track of what needs replacing, what can be repaired, what materials need to be ordered, is as much a part of the job as the actual physical work. By evening, you've completed maybe half the leather repairs that came in today. The gambeson you started this morning is still only partially sewn. Its channels of replacement will waiting to be closed up. Your hands look like you've been in a fight with an angry cat, covered in small cuts, stains, and calluses that are forming on top of yesterday's blisters. The master armorer surveys the day's work with his usual expression of grim acceptance. "Better," he says, which you're learning is his version of enthusiastic praise. "Tomorrow we tackle the chainmail repairs. Should be straightforward." The journeyman who helped you earlier catches your eye and shakes his head slightly, a warning that straightforward means something completely different in the master armorer's vocabulary than it does in normal human language. You leave the workshop smelling like a combination of wet wool, animal fat, mildew, and despair. Your clothes are stained beyond any hope of coming clean. Your hands hurt in ways you didn't know hands could hurt. And tomorrow, apparently, you get to discover what straightforward chainmail repair entails. Welcome to the soft goods department, where everything is disgusting and nothing ever gets clean. Try not to think too hard about what those stains actually are. The morning starts with what looks like an avalanche of metal rings dumped unceremoniously on your workbench. Chainmail, hundreds of pounds of it, in various states of damage, all requiring the kind of tedious, eye-destroying precision work that makes you nostalgic for yesterday's mildewed gambeson repairs. The master armorer gestures at the pile with the casual air of someone assigning a simple task. Inspect all of it. Mark broken rings, separate by repair type. He hands you a piece of chalk and walks away, leaving you staring at what might as well be a mountain of medieval misery. You pick up the first piece à coiffe, the hood of chainmail that protects the head and neck. It weighs maybe 8 pounds, but holding it up to examine the rings makes your arms shake within minutes. Remember that count from your first day? 8 to 15,000 individual rings in a single coif? You're about to become intimately familiar with every single one. The rings are small, roughly 1/3 of an inch in diameter, each one a tiny circle of iron wire that's been linked through 4 neighbors in what's called a 4-in-1 pattern. Some rings are riveted closely, a small section of the ring flattened and punched with a hole, then overlapped and secured with a tiny rivet. Others are solid rings, punched from sheet metal, interspersed with the riveted ones to create additional strength. Your job is to find the broken ones, the ones where the rivet has sheared off, the ones where the ring itself has cracked under impact, the ones where corrosion has eaten through the metal. It's like the world's worst game of Where's Waldo? Except Waldo is a microscopic failure point in a sea of identical metal circles, and your eyes start crossing after about 5 minutes. You hold the coif up to the light from the workshop's small window, trying to spot irregularities. There are a ring with no rivet, dangling loose. You mark it with chalk. Keep going. Another broken ring, this one cracked completely through. Mark it. Your neck is already starting to hurt from the angle required to examine the interior of the coif. After maybe an hour, you've found 17 broken rings in one coif and covered approximately 1/3 of its surface area. At this rate, full inspection will take 3 hours per piece. You look at the pile. There are at least 12 chainmail items in various states of damage. The math is horrifying, looking at potentially days of just inspection work before you even start the actual repairs. A young apprentice, maybe 14 years old, sits down across from you with another chainmail haberka full shirt that goes to mid-thigh. He begins his own inspection with the resigned expression of someone who's done this 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more. His fingers move quickly, feeling for gaps and weaknesses, his eyes scanning for visual damage. He's found 4 broken rings in the time it took you to find one. You develop a feel for it, he says, echoing that phrase you're learning to hate. The broken ones feel different when you run your fingers across them. You don't have to look at every single ring if you know what to feel for. He demonstrates, running his fingertips lightly across the surface of the mail, pausing when he encounters an irregularity. There, he says, marking a spot with chalk. Sure enough, there's a broken ring exactly where he indicated. You try to replicate his technique, running your fingers across the coif surface. All the rings feel the same to you: hard, cold, slightly rough from corrosion. You have no idea what you're supposed to be feeling for, but you keep trying, because the alternative is staring at each individual ring. And that way lies madness. The actual repair process, you discover, is somehow even more tedious than the inspection. For each broken ring, you need to remove the damaged ring by opening its neighbors, which means prying apart tiny metal circles with pliers without breaking them further. Select a replacement ring from the workshop supply. Thread the new ring through the surrounding rings in the correct pattern, and then close it properly, either by riveting if it's a riveted ring or by ensuring it's seated correctly if it's a solid punch ring. The master armorer demonstrates on the first broken ring you found. He uses 2 pairs of small pliers, one to hold the chainmail steady, one to carefully spread the opening of an adjacent ring just enough to slip the broken ring out. The motion requires precision and control. Too much force, and you'll break another ring. Too little, and the ring won't open enough to work with. He selects a replacement from a box of pre-made rings. The workshop keeps supplies in various sizes because different mail pieces use slightly different ring diameters. He threads the new ring through the 4 connection points, ensuring it's oriented correctly. Chainmail has a right and wrong way. Get it backwards, and the pattern breaks down. Then comes the riveting, which you remember from making rivets for the plate armor but is somehow even more delicate when working with rings this small. The ring has been flattened at the ends, with a small hole punched through the overlap. He places a tiny rivet seriously. This rivet is maybe 2 millimeters in diameter through the hole and sets it against a small anvil designed specifically for mail work. 1 tap with a lightweight hammer. The rivet spreads slightly. Another tap. The rivet head forms. Too much force, and the ring deforms or the rivet punches completely through. Too little, and the rivet won't hold. He makes it look effortless. You know it absolutely isn't. Your turn, he says, pointing to the next broken ring. Your first attempt takes 15 minutes and results in 3 newly broken rings as you fumble with the pliers. The master armorer watches with the patience of a man who's seen countless apprentices destroy his inventory before you. Gentler is his only comment. You try again. This time you successfully remove the broken ring without causing additional damage. Small victories. You select a replacement ring, attempting to match the size and gauge of the surrounding mail. Threading it through the connection points is like trying to solve a puzzle box while wearing oven mitts. You can see what needs to happen, but making it actually happen requires fine motor control your tired hands don't possess. The ring finally seats correctly. Now for the rivet. You position the tiny rivet it keeps trying to fall out, because of course it does, and prepare to strike it. Your first tap misses the rivet entirely and hits the ring, creating a small dent. The master armorer winces but doesn't stop you. Your second tap connects. Barely. The rivet spreads infinitesimally. After maybe a dozen taps, the rivet is formed. It's not pretty, the head is slightly asymmetrical, and you've created some surface damage on the ring, but it's functional. The master armorer inspects it, grunts something that might be approval or might be suppressed horror, and moves on. 1 ring repaired. 16 more just in this coif. Probably 200 more in the complete pile of damaged mail. Historians still argue whether chainmail or plate armor was more effective on the medieval battlefield, whether the flexibility of mail outweighed its vulnerability to piercing weapons, whether the two systems were complementary or competitive. What's not up for debate is that chainmail was absolutely brutal to maintain, requiring hundreds of hours of microscopic repair work that could drive a person slowly insane. The afternoon brings a special challenge. A hauberk with severe damage from what looks like a sword cut. Multiple rings aren't just broken, theory missing entirely, leaving a gap maybe 3 inches long. This isn't individual ring replacement. This is reconstruction, weaving new rings into the existing pattern to rebuild the damaged section. The master armorer assigns this to the experienced journeyman, but you're told to watch and learn. The journeyman starts by defining the edges of the damaged area, ensuring all the surrounding rings are intact and properly connected. Then he begins adding rings, one at a time, building out from the solid areas into the gap. Each new ring has to connect to the correct neighbors in the correct pattern. Get it wrong, and the whole section becomes weak. The pattern breaks down. The mail loses its integrity. He works methodically, consulting the existing pattern, counting connections, ensuring each ring is oriented properly before riveting it closed. This section will take about 4 hours. He mentions casually, 4 hours to repair a 3-inch gap. You do the math on how long it would take to construct an entire hauberk from scratch and understand why chainmail was so expensive. A full shirt might contain 20 to 30,000 rings, each one individually linked and riveted. That's hundreds of hours of labor, weeks or months of work for a skilled craftsman. And people wonder why armor was so costly, why it was a marker of wealth, why armies couldn't just equip every soldier with full mail coverage. The labor economics made it impossible. Each piece represented such an enormous investment of time and skill that losing it in battle was a genuine financial disaster. You return to your coif repairs, working through the broken rings one by tedious one. Your eyes are burning from the close focus. Your fingers are developing new calluses on top of the old ones, specifically in the spots where the plier handles press into your skin. You've dropped approximately 50 tiny rivets on the floor, losing them forever in the workshop's dirt and debris. The master armorer has stopped wincing when this happens, which somehow feels worse than if he'd yell about it. Somewhere around your 8th successful ring replacement, you start to feel something that might be the beginning of competence. Your fingers find the right grip on the pliers slightly faster. You thread the replacement ring through its neighbors with fewer false starts. The riveting still takes too many strikes, but at least you're hitting the rivet more often than the surrounding metal. The young apprentice who helped you earlier looks over at your work. "Not bad," he says, which coming from a 14-year-old who's better at this than you'll ever be feels simultaneously encouraging and devastating. Weapons start arriving in the afternoon, and you discover that the armory's responsibilities extend beyond just armor. Swords need sharpening. Polearms need their heads secured to their shafts. Crossbows need maintenance on their mechanisms. Every single piece of military equipment eventually flows through this workshop, and all of it needs attention. A soldier drops off a sword with a visibly damaged edge, a series of small chips, and one larger notch where the blade hit something very hard, probably another sword or a piece of armor. The master armorer examines it, running his thumb carefully along the edge, assessing the damage. "Needs grinding and resharpening," he announces. "The notch is too deep to file out." Grinding means the grinding wheel, a large stone wheel turned by a foot treadle, used to remove damaged metal and reshape edges. You've seen it in the corner of the workshop but haven't used it yet. That's about to change. The master armorer sets up the sword in a jig that holds it at the correct angle to the wheel. He demonstrates the technique. Steady pressure, consistent motion, keeping the blade moving across the wheel to prevent uneven grinding. The wheel throws sparks, tiny particles of steel being abraded away, glowing briefly before falling as dust. "Don't overheat the steel," he warns. "If you see the metal turning colors blue or purpley, you've ruined the temper. The blade becomes soft, useless. Keep it cool." He works the blade across the wheel, periodically dipping it in water to prevent heat buildup. The damaged section slowly disappears, the notch being ground away, the edge being reformed. After maybe 15 minutes, the blade is straight again, the damage removed. Now it needs sharpening, which is a different process with finer stones. He hands you a sword with minor edge damage, just some small chips. Nothing dramatic. Your turn. You secure it in the jig, trying to replicate the angle you watched him use. You start the foot treadle, building up speed on the wheel. You bring the blade into contact with the spinning stone. The sword immediately tries to jump out of your hands. The grinding wheel catches the edge and wants to either climb up the blade or pull it sideways, depending on the angle. You're fighting to control it, maintaining pressure while preventing the blade from doing something catastrophic. Sparks fly. You have no idea if you're removing metal from the right place or just randomly grinding away the blade. You pull it away from the wheel and examine your work. You've created a new flat spot on the edge that wasn't there before. This is the opposite of improvement. The master armorer sighs, his signature sigh of disappointed acceptance. "Angle was wrong," he explains, repositioning the sword in the jig. "And you're pressing too hard. Let the wheel do the work." You try again, adjusting everything, moving more carefully, slightly better. You're at least removing metal from approximately the correct location now. The edge is slowly, very slowly, being reformed. You periodically dip the blade in water, checking for color changes that would indicate overheating. So far the steel is staying its normal gray color. Small victories. The grinding work is meditative in a way that chainmail repair isn't. There's a rhythm to the foot treadle, a consistent sound from the wheel, a visible progression as the damaged areas disappear. But it's also nerve-wracking because mistakes are permanent. Grind away too much metal, and you've changed the blade's geometry, potentially ruining its balance or edge-holding capability. After what feels like an eternity, the edge damage is gone. The blade needs proper sharpening now, which moves to progressively finer stones. But at least the gross damage has been corrected. You've managed not to destroy a soldier's primary weapon. The bar for success is apparently very low in this profession. More weapons pile up. A poleaxe with a loose head needs to be re-wedged. The wooden shaft has dried and shrunk, allowing the metal head to wobble. A crossbow's trigger mechanism is sticking, requiring disassembly and cleaning of the lock. A dagger's handle wrapping has come undone, exposing the tang, requiring rewrapping with new cord. Each item is a different problem requiring different skills. You're bouncing between tasks, never mastering any of them, just achieving basic competence through frantic trial and error. The master armorer circulates through the workshop like a disappointed guardian angel, correcting, demonstrating, preventing complete disasters. By evening, you've repaired maybe 20 chainmail rings, ground one sword edge without completely ruining it, and assisted with various other repairs that you'll barely remember tomorrow. Your hands are shaking from fatigue. Your eyes are bloodshot from close focus work. You've developed a headache from the grinding wheels noise and the constant concentration. The pile of broken equipment has been replaced by a pile of repaired equipment, but a new pile of broken items has arrived to take its place. The cycle is endless. Soldiers break things faster than you can fix them. Entropy is winning, and you're just here to slow down its inevitable victory. Welcome to weapon maintenance purgatory, where everything is broken and nothing stays fixed. Try not to grind your fingers off along with the sword edges. Morning brings an unexpected visitor. A merchant. Not a soldier, not a nobleman, but a squat, well-dressed man with sharp eyes and a ledger book tucked under his arm. He's a supplier, and the master armorer's expression when he arrives tells you this conversation is going to be unpleasant. Master William, the merchant says, his voice carrying the false warmth of someone about to discuss money. I've come about the outstanding account. The master armorer apparently named William, which is the first time you've heard anyone use his actual name, sets down the helmet he was examining and wipes his hands on his apron. Master Thomas, I wasn't expecting you until next week. Yes, well, the merchant's smile doesn't reach his eyes. The account is now 3 months overdue. My patience, I'm afraid, has limits. You're witnessing something you hadn't really considered. The armory isn't just a workshop, it's a business. And businesses need money. Specifically, they need money flowing in faster than it flows out, which apparently isn't happening here. The master armorer retrieves his own ledger from a locked chest, spreading it on a relatively clean section of workbench. The pages are covered in numbers, names, Datisa record of every transaction, every piece of equipment worked on, every payment received or still owed. He traces his finger down a column. The Army Paymaster owes us for 63 separate repairs completed last month. Master Williams says, once that payment comes through, once, the merchant interrupts. How many times have I heard, once the army pays? The army is notoriously slow with payments. Master William, you know this. I know this. Yet you continue to extend credit to them while I'm expected to provide materials on faith. You're standing there holding a chainmail coif, frozen mid-repair, inadvertently eavesdropping on what's becoming an increasingly tense negotiation. The other apprentices and journeymen have also gone quiet, everyone pretending to focus on their work while obviously listening. I need 40 pounds of iron wire for the mail repairs, Master William says, and another 20 pounds of medium-weight leather. The spring steel for weapon repairs. 3 dozen bronze buckles. 2 rolls of waxed linen thread. The merchant consults his ledger. That's approximately 8 pounds sterling worth of materials. Added to your current outstanding balance of 12 pounds, we're looking at a total debt of 20 pounds. He looks up. That's more than most craftsmen earn in a year, Master William. The number hangs in the air like smoke. 20 pounds. You've been working here for less than a week, but you've learned enough to understand that's a staggering sum. A skilled craftsman might earn 30 to 40 pounds annually. An unskilled laborer, maybe 4 pounds. The armory is carrying a debt that represents half a year's earnings for a master craftsman. The campaign continues for another 2 months. Master William says, the army will need constant repairs during that time. Once the campaign concludes and the paymaster settles accounts. Once. That word again. The merchant closes his ledger with a snap that echoes through the workshop. I have suppliers of my own, Master William. The tannery wants payment. The wire drawer wants payment. The charcoal merchant is threatening to cut off deliveries. I cannot continue advancing materials indefinitely. This is the economic reality nobody mentions in the heroic tales of medieval warfare. Armies don't pay promptly. Paymasters are corrupt or disorganized or simply don't have funds available. Soldiers go months without wages. And the craftsmen who keep the army functional, the armourers, the farriers, the wagon-wrights, are expected to work on credit, hoping they'll eventually be paid, watching their debts accumulate like rust on neglected steel. Master William's jaw tightens. What are you proposing? Immediate payment of at least half the outstanding balance. The merchant says, and no further materials on credit until the account is settled. That's impossible. Without materials, I can't complete repairs. Without completing repairs, I don't get paid. You're asking me to close the workshop. I'm asking you to manage your finances more carefully. The merchant's voice has lost its false warmth entirely. Perhaps accept fewer army contracts. Perhaps require deposits from your noble clients before beginning their tournament armor. Perhaps you could extend another month's grace. Master William interrupts. The paymaster has promised settlement within 6 weeks. I'll pay you the full outstanding balance plus an additional 10% for your patience. The merchant considers this, his expression calculating. 10% interest on 12 pounds is substantial more than a pound, enough to make the extension worthwhile if the payment actually materializes. 6 weeks. He finally says, not a day more, and if the army doesn't pay, I'll be filing a complaint with the guild. The guild. You've heard references to the Armourers Guild, the organization that regulates the trade, sets standards, mediates disputes, and crucially can revoke a master armorer's right to practice if he's found in violation of guild rules. Financial irresponsibility, defaulting on debts, failing to maintain standards, all potential grounds for losing your livelihood. The merchant leaves. Master William stands there for a long moment, staring at his ledger, his expression darker than you've ever seen it. The workshop slowly returns to its normal noise level. Apprentices and journeymen resuming their conversations. But there's a tension underlying everything now. You're beginning to understand something fundamental. This profession isn't just physically demanding, it's financially precarious. The armorer sits at the intersection of expensive materials, unreliable clients, and constant pressure to deliver quickly. One delayed payment could cascade into debt. One major mistake could mean eating the cost of ruined materials. One dissatisfied noble could spread reputation-destroying rumors. The master armorer catches you staring. "Back to work," he says, his tone sharp. "Those mail repairs won't finish themselves." You return to your chainmail, but your perspective has shifted. Each ring you replace has a cost: the wire it's made from, the time to fabricate it, the coal burned in the forge. Each leather strap you cut represents a piece of expensive hide that had to be purchased, tanned, stored. Every moment spent training you is a moment not spent on profitable work. The workshop isn't a romantic craftsman's paradise. It's a struggling business trying to stay solvent in an economy where clients have all the power and suppliers have all the leverage. A soldier arrives with a breastplate that needs extensive repair: multiple dents, severe rust damage, a cracked rivet mount. Master William examines it, calculating in his head. 4 shillings for the repair, he says. The soldier's face falls. "I don't have 4 shillings. Can you do it for 2? 2 shillings won't cover the materials. I'll pay the rest when the paymaster distributes wages." Master William hesitates. He knows the soldier might not have wages for months. He knows accepting this work means adding to his own financial burden. But he also knows the soldier needs functional armor or he's at serious risk in the next engagement. "Fine," he says finally. "2 now. 2 when you get paid. But you come to me first when those wages arrive. Understood?" The soldier nods gratefully, counting out the coins, small silver pieces that look worn and clipped, possibly short of their official weight. Master William doesn't comment, just adds them to the workshop strongbox and makes a notation in his ledger. Another debt owed to him that may or may not ever be collected. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen were generally prosperous or constantly struggling, whether guild protections provided economic security or just maintained oligarchic control. What's becoming clear to you is that individual experiences varied wildly, and running an armory during an active military campaign was particularly precarious. The afternoon brings more financial complications. A nobleman's steward arrives to collect the tournament armor you helped fit days ago. Master William presents the bill, £3 for the modifications and fitting. The steward examines the itemized list, questioning every charge. 3 hours for fitting? Surely it didn't take that long. It took 4 hours. Master William replies evenly. I rounded down. And this charge for materials, what materials? You used existing straps and buckles. We used thread, oil, cleaning supplies, and wore down files and other tools that will need replacing. The steward harumphs but eventually counts out the coins. Master William checks each one, weighing a few that look suspicious. Medieval currency was a nightmare. Coins were frequently clipped or sweated to remove small amounts of precious metal. Counterfeits circulated freely, and different regions issued coins of varying purity. Accepting payment meant carefully verifying you weren't being cheated. One of the coins is indeed underweight. Master William sets it aside. This one is short. I need replacement. The steward protests, but Master William is firm. Eventually a different coin is produced. The transaction concludes with mutual dissatisfaction, which is apparently the normal state of medieval business dealings. You're learning that a significant portion of the master armorer's time isn't spent doing actual armory work, it's spent negotiating with clients, managing suppliers, maintaining the ledger, chasing down payments, verifying currency, dealing with the endless economic friction of operating a business in an era before standardized contracts or reliable financial institutions. The workshop requires constant cash flow to function. The forge burns through expensive coal. Tools wear out and need replacing. Apprentices need to be fed and housed, even if they're not yet profitable workers. Materials must be purchased before work can begin. And all of this has to be balanced against irregular payments from clients who may take months to settle their accounts. A young apprentice, not the competent 14-year-old you've seen earlier, but a newer one, maybe 12, drops a nearly completed mail repair back into the forge by accident. The rings heat beyond their proper temperature. The metal oxidizes. Hours of work are ruined. Master William's reaction is volcanic. Not just because of the wasted labor, but because those rings represent materials that cost money the workshop doesn't have. The apprentice is reduced to tears. The cost of the mistake will probably come out of his future wages if he has any future in this workshop at all. Medieval apprenticeships could be terminated for incompetence. And this kind of expensive error could be enough to end a career before it starts. You feel sick watching it, understanding that you've made similar mistakes, that luck has just kept your errors from being quite this catastrophic. Every moment in this workshop, you're one mistake away from financial ruin, either your own or the master's. The ledger comes out again in the late afternoon. Master William sits at his desk, updating entries, calculating totals, his expression growing darker with each column he sums. The numbers apparently aren't encouraging. The workshop is operating at a loss, sustained only by hope that future payments will materialize and cover current debts. A journeyman approaches Master William quietly, and you overhear fragments of their conversation. The journeyman is asking about wages, which haven't been paid in 3 weeks. Master William explains the situation: the army's delayed payment, the supplier's demands, the need to prioritize keeping materials flowing so work can continue. The journeyman will be paid when money comes in, maybe next week, probably the week after. The journeyman's face shows resignation. He's probably heard this before. Medieval craftsmen frequently went months between wage payments, surviving on credit from landlords and food vendors who knew they'd eventually be paid, but also knew they had limited recourse if payment never came. This is the hidden reality of medieval craftsmanship. Beneath the skill and tradition and guild prestige, most craftsmen were one crisis away from financial disaster. A major client defaulting, a fire destroying inventory, a theft of materials. Any of these could bankrupt a workshop, destroying decades of built reputation and pushing a master craftsman into destitution. You look around the workshop with new eyes. Every tool represents an investment. Every piece of leather in storage is tied up capital. Every incomplete repair represents materials purchased but not yet paid for by clients. The whole operation is an elaborate balancing act, and you're watching it teeter dangerously close to collapse. Master William closes his ledger, locks it back in the chest, and returns to examining a damaged helmet. Work continues because it has to continue. Bills don't pay themselves. Apprentices need feeding. Suppliers need appeasing. The only way through is forward, one repair at a time, hoping the economic situation resolves before the debts become insurmountable. You return to your chainmail repairs, but the metal rings feel heavier now, weighted with the knowledge that each one costs money the workshop doesn't have. that your slow incompetence is literally expensive, that every mistake you make contributes to a financial crisis you can't fully comprehend. Welcome to the economics of medieval craftsmanship, where skill means nothing if you can't collect payment and where the difference between success and bankruptcy is often just which clients pay promptly. Try not to ruin anything expensive today, because the workshop genuinely can't afford it. The alarm goes up just after midday horns blowing, men shouting, the specific kind of chaos that means something bad has happened. You look up from the sword you're attempting to sharpen, catching the master armorer's expression as he processes the sounds. His face goes through several emotions in rapid succession: concern, resignation, and finally grim determination. Battle, he says simply. Close engagement, from the sound of it. Wounded incoming. You don't understand what that means for the workshop until the first soldier staggers through the door, supported by two companions. He's still wearing most of his armor, which is the problem. There's a dent in his breastplate deep enough that you can see it's pressing into his chest. His breathing is shallow, pained. Blood is seeping from somewhere underneath the steel. Get it off him, one of his companions says urgently. We can't remove it ourselves. The straps are jammed. The master armorer is already moving, gesturing for you and two apprentices to help. This is apparently part of the armorer's job that nobody mentioned. Emergency armor removal from wounded men. The armor that's supposed to protect them is now potentially killing them, and you're responsible for getting it off without making things worse. The soldier is laid on a workbench, same bench where you were filing sword edges minutes ago, now being used as an improvised medical table. The master armorer examines the breastplate, assessing how the dent has deformed the metal. The side straps are pinched. He announces, "We'll need to cut them. Hold him steady." You're assigned to keep the soldier's shoulders down while the master armorer works. The man is conscious, which somehow makes it worse. He's trying not to scream, biting down on a leather strap someone's shoved in his mouth, his eyes wide with pain and fear. You can feel him trembling under your hands. The master armorer cuts through the leather straps with a sharp knife, working quickly but carefully. Each strap releases tension, but the breastplate is still trapped, the dent creating a vise that's crushing the soldier's ribs. We'll need to spread it, Master William says. Get the spreader. An apprentice runs to retrieve a tool you haven't seen before, basically two metal arms with a screw mechanism between them, designed to force objects apart. The master armorer positions it inside the breastplate, against the edges of the dent, and begins turning the screw. Slowly, with horrible creaking sounds, the metal begins to deform, the dent spreading, the pressure releasing. The soldier makes a sound that will haunt your nightmares. Relief mixed with agony as crushed ribs suddenly have space to expand, but the damage has already been done. The breastplate finally comes free, revealing a chest covered in dark bruises, some already turning black. Blood is seeping from his mouth, internal injuries, probably punctured lung. Get him to the surgeons, Master William orders, and the soldier's companions carry him back out, leaving a smear of blood on the workbench. You stand there, shaking, staring at your hands that were just pressing down on a wounded man's shoulders, at the breastplate that nearly became a coffin. The master armorer is already cleaning the blood off the tools, his face expressionless. This is normal for him. This is just another day. Back to work, he says to the workshop at large. There will be more. He's right. Over the next hour, 7 more wounded soldiers arrive, each one wearing armor that's become a liability rather than protection. A helmet so dented it's pressing against the skull, you help cut the leather chin strap and pry the metal away from a head wound that's bleeding profusely. A gauntlet crushed around a hand with clearly broken fingers, the master armorer has to carefully work the articulated plates apart, each movement causing the soldier to gasp in pain. A greave that's been bent by what must have been a poleaxe strike, trapping the lower leg. Cutting off circulation, this one requires the grinding wheel to cut through the metal because there's no time for careful disassembly. The workshop transforms into something between a medical station and a butcher's shop. There's blood on the workbenches, blood on the tools, blood on the floor. The forge is used not for crafting but for heating metal to make it malleable enough to bend away from trapped limbs. The hammers you've been using for shaping armor are now being used to carefully flatten crushed sections enough to slide them off broken bones. You're not a healer. You're not trained for this. But you're here, and these men need help. So you're holding limbs steady while the master armorer cuts straps and pries metal. You're watching wounds be exposed as armor comes away, seeing the actual effects of medieval combat, not clean sword cuts like in stories, but ugly crushing injuries, massive bruises, torn flesh where edges of armor have been driven into skin by tremendous impact. One soldier has a piece of his own chainmail embedded in his shoulder, driven into the flesh by whatever struck him. The master armorer has to use pliers to extract the rings, one by one, while the soldier screams. You're holding his other arm, keeping him from thrashing, feeling his muscles strain against your grip, watching blood well up from each tiny hole as the rings come free. Historians still argue whether medieval armor was primarily effective or whether its protection was overstated, whether knights were tanks or merely somewhat harder to kill than unarmored soldiers. What's clear from this horrific afternoon is that armor could save your life and nearly kill you, simultaneously protecting you from the initial blow, but then requiring careful removal to prevent the protection itself from finishing what the enemy started. The master armorer works with grim efficiency, his hands steady despite the gore, his voice calm even when delivering bad news. This one's beyond us, he says about a soldier whose breastplate has been pierced by what looks like a lance tip, the metal driven through and into his torso. Get him to the surgeons immediately. The armor stays on until they can remove it properly. That soldier doesn't make it 10 feet out the door before collapsing. His companions drag him away, leaving a trail. You don't know if he survives. You don't want to know. Between the emergency removals, there's the armor itself, all these damaged pieces that have just been cut off wounded men. They represent the ongoing work, the repairs that will need to be made, but they also represent something darker. Each dented breastplate is evidence of trauma. Each crushed helmet contained a human head. Each piece of blood-stained mail was someone's last line of defense against death. You're supposed to sort these pieces, set them aside for eventual repair, but touching them feels wrong. The blood is still wet. You can see hair stuck in the helmet lining. There's a tooth embedded in one chainmail coif, knocked loose by impact. These aren't just equipment anymore. They're relics of suffering. An older journeyman works beside you, collecting the damaged pieces with the practiced indifference of someone who's done this many times. You get used to it, he says, noticing your hesitation. The blood washes off. The metal can be repaired. Focus on that. But you can't focus on that. You keep seeing the soldiers' faces, the pain and fear, the horrible vulnerability of men trapped inside the very equipment meant to protect them. You keep hearing the sounds, metal grinding on metal, men screaming, The wet, sucking noise of armor being pulled away from bleeding wounds. More wounded arrive. A knight this time, wearing expensive articulated plate, his squire frantic beside him. The knight took a mace blow to the side, and his cuirass has multiple broken rivets, the plates separated and twisted. The master armorer examines it carefully, determining that cutting the remaining straps is the safest option. The knight protests weakly the armor is valuable, custom-made, but Master William overrides him. Your ribs are broken. The armor is irrelevant if you're dead. The cuirass comes apart in pieces, each section revealing more bruising, more damage. The knight's entire left side is one massive contusion, the flesh already swelling. He's breathing wrong, short gasps that suggest lung damage. The surgeons will have to deal with internal injuries, but at least the armor is off, no longer constricting his breathing. The squire collects the armor pieces reverently, as if gathering the fragments of his lord's dignity. Can it be repaired? He asks. Master William examines the damage. Yes, 2 weeks, maybe 3. Bring it back when he's recovered. If he recovers, everyone's thinking but nobody says. The afternoon stretches into evening, a parade of casualties that seems endless. Some injuries are minor soldiers who can walk and talk but need armor removed because it's damaged or they can't manage the straps with injured hands. Others are catastrophic men barely conscious, armor so mangled it's unrecognizable, wounds that make you wonder how they're still alive. You help with all of them, moving mechanically, following the master armorer's instructions, trying not to think too hard about what you're doing. Hold this, cut that, apply pressure here, don't let him move. Ignore the screaming, focus on the task. Your hands are covered in blood, other people's blood, soaked into your skin, under your fingernails, staining your clothes. The workshop floor is slick with it. The iron smell mixes with the usual forge scents, creating something nauseating. Between wounded soldiers, you glimpse the continuing repair work. The apprentices are still working on the routine maintenance, still fixing the everyday damage, because that work doesn't stop just because there's a crisis. The war machine keeps grinding, consuming equipment and spitting out damaged pieces faster than any workshop could ever keep up with. A supply sergeant arrives during a brief lull, demanding to know when the repairs from 2 days ago will be ready. Master William looks at him with an expression of barely controlled rage. When the wounded stop arriving and I have hands free to work on them, he says flatly, until then, they wait. The sergeant starts to argue, sees the blood covering everything, and decides discretion is the better part of valor. He leaves without another word. As darkness falls, the flow of wounded finally slows and stops. Either the battle has ended or the casualties have been processed through other channels. The workshop looks like an abattoir. There's blood on every surface. Tools are scattered everywhere. The pile of damaged, blood-soaked armor has grown into a small mountain of metal testimony to violence. Master William surveys the carnage, his shoulders sagging. He looks older than he did this morning, aged by the parade of suffering he's witnessed. Clean the tools first, he instructs quietly. Then the workbenches. The floor can wait until tomorrow. You begin the cleanup, washing blood off metal with water and rags. The water in the bucket turns red almost immediately. You dump it out, refill it, turns red again. How much blood is this? How many men contributed to this grotesque soup? The other apprentices work silently. Even the usually chatty journeymen are quiet. There's nothing to say. You've all seen things today that will stay with you, images that will surface in nightmares, sounds that will echo in quiet moments. A young apprentice, the competent 14-year-old who helped you with chainmail, is crying silently while he cleans. Nobody comments on it. Nobody tells him to toughen up. Some things are worth crying about. Master William sits at his desk, not updating the ledger, just sitting, staring at nothing, processing, probably, or trying not to process. You wonder how many times he's been through this, how many wounded men he's helped, how many have died despite his efforts, how he keeps doing this job, day after day, knowing that every piece of armor he repairs will probably come back damaged again, carried by another wounded soldier or collected from a corpse. This is the part of the armorer's job that isn't in any apprenticeship contract, that nobody mentions when they talk about learning a trade. You're not just maintaining equipment. You're part of the machinery of war, complicit in the cycle of violence, responsible for sending men back into danger wearing armor you've repaired, knowing it might not save them, knowing you might have to cut it off their broken bodies afterward. The clean tools go back on their racks. The workbenches are scrubbed, though bloodstains have soaked into the wood and won't come out. The pile of damaged armor sits in the corner, waiting for attention that probably won't come for days because there's too much routine work backlogged already. You stumble out of the workshop long after dark, your clothes stiff with dried blood, your hands shaking from exhaustion and horror. The night air feels shockingly clean after hours in the blood-scented workshop. Somewhere in the camp, men are celebrating survival or mourning losses. You're just trying to process what you witnessed, trying to reconcile the abstract concept of battlefield injuries with the visceral reality of crushed limbs and screaming soldiers. Welcome to the emergency room of medieval warfare, where the armorer's workshop becomes a triage center and you learn that protecting people sometimes means cutting away their protection before it kills them. Try to sleep tonight, knowing you'll probably be doing this again tomorrow. You don't sleep well. Nobody in the workshop does. The screams from yesterday echo in your mind every time you close your eyes, and when you finally drift off, you dream of twisted metal and blood. You wake before dawn feeling more exhausted than when you went to bed, your hands still aching, your muscles stiff, your mind heavy with images you can't shake. But the work doesn't care about your nightmares or your exhaustion. You drag yourself back to the workshop as the sky begins to lighten, finding that Master William is already there. He looks like he hasn't slept at all, his eyes red-rimmed, his movements slower than usual, but his hands are steady as he sorts through the pile of blood-stained armor from yesterday, beginning the grim assessment of what can be salvaged and what's beyond repair. We start with the emergency work. He announces as the other apprentices and journeymen filter in. The army moves in 2 days. Everything that can be made functional needs to be functional. Everything else gets cataloged as loss. 2 days. The timeline that's been hanging over you since the beginning has suddenly become immediate and terrifying. 2 days to process all the routine repairs you've been working on all week. 2 days to somehow repair the mountain of damaged equipment from yesterday's battle. 2 days to achieve the impossible with hands that are already destroyed and spirits that are already broken. The master armorer assigns tasks with swift efficiency. The journeymen get the complex repairs, the severely damaged breastplates, the helmets that need complete reshaping, the chainmail with extensive reconstruction requirements. The more experienced apprentices get the moderate repair straps to replace. minor dents to hammer out, rust to remove and oil to apply. And you? You get the soul-crushing volume work, inspecting, sorting, cleaning, performing the hundreds of small maintenance tasks that keep equipment functional even if not perfect. Your first assignment is to oil every piece of equipment that's been cleaned and repaired but not yet treated for storage or return to service. This means taking each piece breastplates, helmets, gauntlets, greaves, pauldron sand, methodically coating every surface with a thin layer of oil to prevent rust from immediately reestablishing its foothold. The oil is a mixture of rendered animal fat and beeswax, warmed slightly to make it easier to apply. You dip a rag into the mixture and begin working it into the metal. Feeling the resistance of cold steel gradually become smooth as the oil fills the microscopic surface irregularities. The motion is meditative, almost calming after yesterday's trauma, a return to routine that feels like a lifeline to normalcy. But the volume is staggering. Each piece takes maybe 5 minutes to oil properly, ensuring you cover every surface. Work the mixture into joints and articulations. Avoid leaving puddles that will attract dirt. There are dozens of pieces waiting. Your arms are burning after the first hour, the repetitive motion straining muscles already fatigued from a week of labor. A young apprentice works beside you, polishing steel with fine sand and leather until it shines. His job is to make the armor look presentable, because apparently even in the middle of a military campaign, appearance matters. Knights want their armor gleaming. Commanders want their officers looking sharp. The difference between functional and presentable is hours of additional labor that nobody compensates you for, but it's expected nonetheless. Do you think we'll finish in time? The apprentice asks quietly, not looking up from his polishing. You don't know. You honestly don't know. The pile doesn't seem to shrink no matter how much work everyone does. For every piece you finish, someone delivers 2 more. The army is a vast machine consuming equipment at a rate that exceeds any possible repair capacity. Master William circulates through the workshop, checking work, redirecting efforts, making the constant tactical decisions about what gets priority. A nobleman's decorative tournament helm or a common soldier's functional breastplate. The helm pays better, but the soldier actually needs his armor for survival. He chooses the breastplate, and you see him make that choice over and over: function over profit, necessity over economics, knowing it's destroying the workshop's finances but unable to choose otherwise. The forge roars continuously, multiple projects running simultaneously. One journeyman is heating and hammering a crushed vambrace back into shape. Another is welding a cracked pauldron section, the metal glowing orange as he fuses it back together. An apprentice is at the grinding wheel, working on sword after sword, creating a continuous spray of sparks and a screaming sound that sets your teeth on edge. The morning passes in a blur of oil and metal and repetitive motion. Your hands develop new blisters on top of barely healed ones from earlier in the week. The oil seeps into every crack in your skin, stinging and coating everything, making it impossible to get a secure grip on anything. You drop a helmet, denting it slightly on the stone floor, and Master William's expression makes you wish you could disappear entirely. "More careful," is all he says, but the disappointment is crushing. Around midday, more damaged equipment arrives, not from combat this time, but from training. Soldiers preparing for the army's movement have been drilling hard, and training equipment has failed. Broken practice swords, dented shields, armor pieces with split straps or sprung rivets. This all added to the pile, because apparently the distinction between combat damage and training damage is irrelevant to the armorer's workload. You're moved to strap replacement, which should be straightforward but isn't. Each piece of armor uses straps of different widths and lengths. Some have complex buckle attachments. Others use simple ties. Many have been customized over time with non-standard repairs, meaning you can't just replicate a standard pattern. You have to figure out what the soldier actually did to make the armor work for them and preserve that functionality. You're measuring, cutting leather, punching holes, attaching buckles. The work requires focus and precision, but also speed, which are not compatible requirements. You rush and make mistakes. You slow down and fall behind. There's no winning, just varying degrees of inadequacy. A supply sergeant arrives with the army's quartermaster, conducting an inventory of the workshop's backlog. They want to know exactly how many pieces are still awaiting repair, what the timeline is, which items are priority. Master William walks them through the sorted piles, explaining the triage system he's implemented. Critical repairs first items soldiers absolutely need for survival. Secondary repairs next items that improve safety or effectiveness. Tertiary repairs last cosmetic fixes and non-essential modifications. The quartermaster is not pleased. We have 47 men without functional chest protection. He says, 23 need helmets. 18 are missing gauntlets or greaves. This is unacceptable. Master William's jaw tightens. I have 3 journeymen, 6 apprentices, and limited materials. If the army wants faster repairs, the army can assign me more craftsmen or reduce the rate at which equipment is damaged. We're going into battle. Armorer. Equipment will be damaged. Then men will wait for repairs. Quartermaster. I cannot change the laws of time and physics. The standoff is tense but brief. The quartermaster has no real leverage. The workshop is already working at maximum capacity. Complaining won't make repairs happen faster. He leaves with his inventory list, probably to report up the chain of command that the armory situation is dire, as if that information will somehow conjure additional resources or time. The afternoon brings the chainmail work you've been dreading. Remember those hundreds of broken rings you identified earlier in the week? They all need replacing now. Not eventually, not when time permits now, because the army moves in 2 days and soldiers need their mail functional. You sit at the workbench with a basket of replacement rings, a coif spread before you, and a sense of existential despair. Each ring needs to be opened, threaded through its neighbors, positioned correctly, and then closed either by riveting if it's a riveted ring, or by ensuring it's seated properly if it's a solid ring. You've gotten marginally faster at this over the week, but marginally faster still means maybe 3 or 4 rings per hour if you're lucky. The coif has 47 broken rings marked with chalk. At 4 rings per hour, you're looking at approximately 12 hours of work on just this one item, and there are 3 more coifs and 2 hauberks waiting after this one, all with similar damage levels. You start working, falling into the tedious rhythm of open thread position close. Your fingers find the patterns more easily now than they did days ago. Muscle memory is forming despite your incompetence. The journeyman who helped you earlier works nearby on a hauberk with extensive damage, his fingers moving 3 times faster than yours, completing repairs in the time it takes you to even identify the proper approach. The trick is not thinking about it, he says, noticing your attention. Your hands learn the patterns. Your eyes learn to see the structure. Eventually it becomes automatic. like walking. Eventually, that word haunts you. Everything in this profession is eventually you'll be competent. Eventually you'll be fast. Eventually you'll stop destroying equipment and wasting materials. But eventually is measured in years, and you have hours. The sun moves across the sky, visible through the workshop's small windows. Shadows lengthen. The light becomes orange, then red, then begins to fade. Apprentices light candles and oil lamps because the work continues past dark. It has to. The deadline is immovable, and the pile is insurmountable, so everyone just keeps working, hoping that somehow quantity will overcome impossibility. Your back is screaming from hunching over the workbench. Your eyes burn from close focus in increasingly poor light. Your fingers are bleeding again. You've stopped noticing exactly when injuries happen. They just accumulate throughout the day until your hands are a collection of small wounds held together by determination and oil. Master William makes his rounds, examining work, occasionally correcting mistakes, mostly just ensuring everyone stays focused. He's been working non-stop since before dawn, and you realize with sudden clarity that he'll probably work through the night. The master armorer doesn't have the luxury of rest when deadlines approach. He's responsible for everything, everyone, the success or failure of the entire operation. Dinner is bread and cheese eaten at the workbench, washing it down with weak beer, barely tasting anything. Food is just fuel, a brief pause in the labor. You finish eating and immediately return to the chainmail, opening the next ring, threading it through, positioning it, closing it, again, and again, and again. The night deepens. Some of the younger apprentices are sent to sleep. Theory more liability than help when exhausted, likely to make expensive mistakes. You're kept working, probably because you're already so incompetent that the difference between well-rested and exhausted isn't significant enough to matter. The workshop at night has a different quality, quieter, more focused, the isolation of darkness creating a bubble where only the work exists. The sounds are hypnotic. Hammers on anvils, files on metal, the crackle of the forge, the occasional curse when someone burns themselves or drops something. Outside, the army camp is settling down for the night, soldiers sleeping while craftsmen labor to keep them equipped. You finish the coif sometime around midnight, your 40th broken ring replaced, the mail restored to functional integrity. You hold it up, examining it by lamplight, looking for missed repairs. The metal gleams dully, the rings interlocking in their eternal pattern. This ancient technology that predates plate armor and will probably outlast it. Simple and effective and absolutely brutal to maintain. Master William inspects your work, checking several of the replacement rings, tugging on the mail to test its integrity. Acceptable, he says, which at this hour, after this day, feels like extravagant praise. He sets the coif aside with the completed repairs and hands you the next Itima hauberk with 38 marked breaks. Your heart sinks, but you take it, spread it on the workbench, select your first replacement ring, and begin again. Open, thread, position, close. The meditation of repetition, the zen of exhaustion, the strange peaceful clarity that comes when you're too tired to worry about being tired. Around 2 in the morning, Master William sends you to sleep. You're making mistakes, he says, not unkindly. Rest 3 hours, then return. You stumble to your sleeping pallet, which is just a thin mat on the workshop floor in a side room. You're asleep before you fully lie down, dropping into unconsciousness like falling into a well. 3 hours later it feels like 3 minutesimeons shaking your shoulder, dragging you back to wakefulness. Your body protests violently, every muscle stiff, every joint aching, your hands throbbing with accumulated damage. But you stand. You splash water on your face from the communal bucket. You return to the workshop, where the work continued without you and will continue after you, eternal and unchanging. The final day before the army's departure is a blur of desperate productivity. Everyone works at maximum capacity, cutting corners where safe, prioritizing ruthlessly, accepting good enough instead of holding out for perfect. Armor gets returned to service with cosmetic damage unrepaired. Chainmail goes out with some rust still present. Straps are adequate rather than ideal. The pile shrinks, not to nothing that was always impossible but to something manageable. The critical items are completed. The secondary priorities are mostly addressed. The tertiary work is abandoned, added to a list of deferred maintenance that will probably never be addressed because by the time there's breathing room, new critical items will have arrived. As the sun sets on your final day before the army moves, Master William gathers everyone in the workshop. The army leaves at dawn. He says, "We've done what we could. Some soldiers go to battle with imperfect equipment because we ran out of time. That's not our failure, that's the reality of war. The work never ends. The pile never empties. We just do what we can with the time and resources available." He pauses, looking at each person, his gaze finally settling on you. "You survived your first campaign support," he says. "Most don't make it through the week. You're still here, still working, despite having no idea what you were doing. That counts for something. It doesn't feel like it counts for much. Your hands are ruined. Your body is exhausted. Your spirit is beaten down by the relentless impossibility of the work. But you're still here, which is apparently the only qualification that matters." The workshop slowly settles into nighttime quiet. Tools are cleaned one final time. The forge is banked. The remaining work is organized for tomorrow. Even though tomorrow most of the army will be gone and the workflow will change completely. You lie on your sleeping pallet, too tired to even process the week you've just survived. The armory's rhythm is still present in your mindemer on anvil, file on metal, the endless repetition of maintenance and repair. You've learned that armoring isn't a glorious craft of creating protective equipment. It's a grinding war against entropy, against rust, against the inevitable decay of materials and the constant damage of use. The master armorer doesn't get to sleep yet. Through the wall, you can hear him at his desk, updating his ledger, calculating costs, trying to balance accounts that don't balance, managing an impossible business that he can't abandon because soldiers' lives depend on the work he does. This is the armorer's endless night, the realization that the work never truly stops, that as long as armies march and warriors fight, there will be damaged equipment needing repair, broken metal needing restoration, and exhausted craftsmen working by candlelight because the deadline is always yesterday and the pile is always growing. Your eyes close, heavy with exhaustion, and your last conscious thought is a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that you survived. Dread that tomorrow brings more work, different but equally impossible. An eternal cycle of maintenance and repair that continues as long as humans wage war and metal oxidizes and leather decays and nothing stays whole for long. The candle in the main workshop flickers. The master armorer continues his accounting. Outside, The army camp settles into pre-departure readiness, and you drift into sleep, your damaged hands still twitching with phantom motions, opening rings, threading metal, hammering rivets, the work following you even into dreams. Welcome to the armorer's endless night, where the day's work bleeds into the next without clear boundaries, where finished is just a temporary state before the next crisis arrives, and where survival means accepting that you'll never truly catch up, never reach the bottom of the pile, never achieve the impossible perfection that the job demands. The work continues tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, forever, or until you break, or until the war ends, whichever comes first. And now, as the workshop finally quiets and the last candles burn low, as exhaustion pulls you deeper into sleep and the sounds of the camp fade to whispers, let yourself drift away from this hard medieval world. Your hands can rest now, at least for a moment. The metal can wait. The rust will still be there tomorrow, patient and persistent. But for now, for these few hours, you can let it all go. The master armorer will continue his accounting, his dedication unwavering even as his eyes grow heavy. The journeyman will rise before dawn to prepare for another day. The apprentices will wake to aching muscles and new impossible tasks. But you, right now, can simply breathe, in and out, slowly, gently. The workshop is peaceful in the deep night, the chaos and noise replaced by stillness. The tools rest in their places, cleaned and ready. The forge's embers glow softly, warmth without demands. Even the pile of waiting work seems less threatening in the darkness, just shapes and shadows, problems for tomorrow's daylight. Your breathing slows, matching the quiet rhythm of the sleeping camp. The week's intensity fades gradually, not forgotten but softened, becoming memory rather than immediate sensation. You survived something difficult, learned something profound about work and dedication and the hidden machinery that keeps armies functional. And as you sink deeper into rest, imagine the morning sun will rise on a quieter workshop. The army departed, the urgent pressure released at least temporarily. Imagine your hands healing slowly, your strength returning, your competence growing incrementally with each passing day. Imagine, perhaps, eventually becoming someone who knows what they're doing, who can look at a pile of damaged equipment without despair, who has earned their place in this ancient, necessary craft. But those are thoughts for another day. For now, there's only sleep, deep and necessary, pulling you down into darkness like warm water. Your breathing evens out completely. The tension in your shoulders releases. Even your damaged hands unclench. Finally relaxed, the armorer's endless night continues around you, but you've found your moment of peace within it. A small quiet space where nothing is demanded and rest is permitted. Let the sounds fade further, the distant camp noises. The master armorers quill scratching ledger pages, even your own breath becoming barely noticeable. Let the darkness become complete and comfortable, not frightening but welcoming, a blanket of rest after impossible labor. Sleep now, deeply and fully. The medieval world will still be there when you wake, with all its difficulties and demands. But for these hours, you're free from it, floating in that peaceful space between days, between tasks, between one version of yourself and whoever you'll become after surviving this week. The armory sleeps around you, even the building itself seeming to rest, stones cooling, timbers settling, everything pausing for just a moment before the cycle begins again. and you sleep within it, part of the workshop's rhythm now, your breath synchronized with its ancient patterns, your rest as earned as any craftsman's has ever been. Good night from the Medieval Armoury, where work is endless but sleep is sacred, where hands may be damaged but spirits endure, where tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight brings only peace.